When at 3:11 in the morning, a mysterious voice doubled the mana of 8 billion people and sorted them. All of humanity was divided into ranks. The strong woke up twice as strong. His innate 2 became 4, the lowest number ever recorded, stamped with a rank F for the whole world to see. The beginner party dragged him along purely out of pity, laughing at him the entire run. But they stopped laughing when his score of 4 suddenly squared itself to 16, then to 256, every morning since, as his body transformed into something unrecognizable. He began soloing the dungeons that top hunters could not finish. He kept every single coin and hid his massive wealth. The system routinely executes anyone who climbs past their assigned rank. This means the actual number hidden behind his name is the greatest crime in this world. This is exactly how it happened, starting from the morning when he had absolutely nothing. The transport itself happened in an instant. 1 second he was lying down in his small rented studio apartment before his morning alarm could ring. The next moment he was standing straight on hard gray dirt beneath a sky colored like a healing bruise. The only sensation his body retained from the sudden trip was a sickening drop in his stomach when the floor shifted. Thousands of confused people stood all around him. Total shock. Some were still dressed in pajamas, including a barefoot man nearby clutching his own elbows while a woman spun in slow circles, searching for an exit that did not exist. Then an unhurried, flat voice echoed down over the massive crowd all at once. It announced to the world that the special twofold decree had officially been applied, meaning their innate mana was doubled just once, and that this new doubled value was permanently locked from that moment on, ranking them from rank F to rank S. Their survival probability was unrated. Then, a status panel popped up. Right in front of everyone, he read his own panel while his pulse hammered wildly. The screen showed his innate mana was originally just 2, and the decree doubled it to 4. His public rank was rank F, the absolute lowest recorded, now locked. He stared at that 4 with the cold dread of someone reading a terminal diagnosis. He had already expected. After all, he spent 11 years working as an insurance actuary, calculating this exact brand of terrible luck for others, having a score of only 4. And the latter required 100 points just to rank up, put him at the very bottom. The statistics were completely against him. Suddenly, a heavy man standing nearby cheered, loudly boasting to everyone around him that his mana score was 800, a solid rank D. Behind him, a young teenager kept muttering her own massive score to herself. 6,000, nearly a rank C. Terrified to stop speaking, the strong received a massive gift on the absolute worst day of their lives, while the weak received a death sentence. The mysterious voice delivered both outcomes with the same flat tone, but he did not despair. Reading the fine print was his only real talent, and thankfully, it saved his life. He carefully scanned the rest of his status screen, finding a secret second line. It was a special line that the other confused people around him did not possess. It revealed an active anomaly subroutine, meaning his actual mana would square itself every cycle. This hidden growth would only show on his private status panel. Growing past his rank violated the system rules, and concealment was highly advised. He stared at that warning twice, filing the dangerous information away for safekeeping. As a massive population counter suddenly appeared in the corner of his screen. Immediately, the total number began to drop rapidly. It plummeted down like water draining away, starting at 8 billion and some odd millions before ticking down further, then another drop. Beside it, a live ledger ticked faster, scrolling names with their stamps and last known locations. The dead turned gray one row at a time. He didn't need a name attached to understand what was thinning their numbers. People were being dragged straight out of their beds onto cold ground, summoned into a realm built to consume them, and those with the lowest numbers found out first. He was a lone wolf. Nobody was waiting for him back home, and absolutely nobody was waiting here, so the ledger felt like cold data rather than real grief, but that data proved the ranking system was being wiped out fastest, and he was at the absolute bottom. The voice returned before he could decide. It ordered all newly stamped F ranks in his sector to head toward the sea for orientation and assignment. Immediately, the ground answered, a massive funnel of dark graystone tearing open. Ahead, a gentle pressure nudged his back, not quite a painful wind, but enough. He went because those who refused became the next gray rows on that deadly list. The sieve turned out to be a massive rocky bowl, sunk into the flat plains with tiered ledges. A floating system marker hung overhead, naming the place a starter calling ground. It declared the dead below were their real tutorial. They would either learn by surviving the shallow end, or feed it pure fodder, and the system had sorted that fodder. Strictly by stamp, the desperate crowd filing down beside him all wore F and E. Rankings over their heads, a starter party quickly formed at the edge, the way they always do, the strongest few drawing in the desperate many. This party was led by a broad E-rank boasting 110 mana. He pointed himself captain in under a minute, gathering bodies for a clearing run into the Civ's lower terrace, where the system promised a wardstone cache. He sized the low ranker up, reading the number 4 above his head, and smirked, doing that sneering routine he would see 100 times that week. Speaking to the group instead of him, the leader muttered that the cache run needed extra backs, since a rank 4 couldn't do anything else. At least he could carry. The entire party laughed, a cheap collective laugh at the dead weight, instantly treating him like a cheap porter already on the roster. A wiry older man with an E-rank over his head caught his eye. Carrying a frame built for heavy hauling, he gave a small, tired shrug that meant take the job because it beats the ledger, so he accepted the work, telling the captain he would carry, shouldering the empty hauling frame they handed him. Down into the pit he went, acting as a mere pack mule. For a team that had already decided his worth, the lower terrace was a flat shelf of stones scattered with wardstones. The system had promised a cache, but it also came with monsters. Knee-high gray crawlers with too many legs were moving in the deep gloom of the pit when the captain yelled for formation. The 2 F-rankers with numbers under 100 took the front line with their cheap weapons. He was waved to the back with the older porter, preparing to load whatever they cleared. For a while things went smoothly, almost too smoothly. But then a heavier shape stepped from the gloom, proving the captain's count was wrong. A single, bracer-armed husk stood before them, a head taller than anyone, an F-rank minion but with very high. It was a monster clearly placed by the system to make this run cost the party. It lunges fast toward the flank, where only the old porter and the boy stood. The captain screams, "Turn the front line," but they are far too slow. The husk closes the distance on the old porter, its arm already swinging. The old man hoists his wooden hauling frame, bracing for a lethal impact. A hit like that would fold him. The boy has one cold realization: death. Another casualty is about to happen right before his eyes, and then his body moves. His hands react before he can even think. His weapon is a simple iron loading bar. Just a dull piece of scrap metal, normally used for lifting bags. Stepping past the old porter, he swings the iron bar right at the creature. The impact should have shattered his wrists, no doubt. That is low-level physics. Mere 4 mana against a strong F-rank always loses, but watch what happens. The iron collides, the creature snaps its arm completely backward with a sickening wet crack. The brutal recoil traveling back up into his shoulders feels like absolutely nothing. It is softer than kicking a door open. He stands there completely stunned by the sheer power. Then he notices something his public rank marker is hiding from the world. That blow did not land with the force of 4. His private system panel registered 16. His real stats had secretly multiplied overnight while the board kept printing 4. And 16 points of mana against a weak F-rank is basically like swatting a moth. Keeping a blank expression, he flips the bar and drives the sharp end upward. It pierces under the jaw of the beast, dropping it instantly as he adopts a slouch. He lets his jaw hang open, perfectly faking the shock of an ordinary weakling. He acts like a guy who just got incredibly lucky. The captain finally rushes over. He stares at the shattered monster and the iron bar held in the hands of the boy. Doing exactly what the young porter needs, the captain tells the party it was a fluke. A complete fluke, a lucky, clumsy swing that somehow jammed perfectly into a soft joint. Even a total weakling gets lucky once a year, making the entire party burst out laughing. They chuckle at the joke, but the old porter laughs loudest of all. The alternative meant admitting just how close he actually came to a brutal death. He claps the boy on the back, telling the captain that this fluke saved him. The old veteran even promises to vouch for his strength from now on. No one noticed. Not a single person looks at the actual stat display of the boy. Nobody bothers to look when a person is stamped with a useless 4. Standing over the dead monster, the boy realizes this anonymity is incredibly valuable. They finish the raid on the terms of the captain. He carries the heavy cargo out. Hauling the heavy ward stones feels completely effortless to his newly empowered body. He splits from the party at the very edge, pocketing his meager share of the loot. But he walks away with a brand new nickname circulating among the local hunters. They call him the Lucky Four. Alone behind a ridge, he opens his panel. The public screen still shows the same old lie. Mana is 4, F rank, locked. But his private status screen tells a completely different story. Mana 16, E rank. The next upgrade cycle resolves at dawn. He has two completely different realities. The massive power gap between them just effortlessly killed an actual dungeon beast. Dawn slowly arrives with a pale, bruised sky, and his daily cycle finally resolves. No sudden, massive surge of power floods his body, but the core change is already done. There was no pain, only his system panel updating as he sat against the ridge. Private line changing from 16 to 256, while the public board next to it. Printed 4, it stayed at 4, as if it would never change in 1,000 years. For a single night, he had been an E rank on his private ledger, though. His rank remained E since the threshold was wide, and 256 was just deep E. He forced himself to accept that huge number and mentally opened a massive calculation. That would take 2 days to finish. 4, 16, 256, he did not name the curve. Yet because celebrating too early makes people comfortable, and comfort was a luxury he could not afford, still he carved those 3 numbers deep into his mind. He kept the calculation running. The second day in the Civ began sorting the survivors into a crude kind of society, the way 3,000 terrified people always do, and his own place was decided by the low number 4 over his head before he even spoke. By then, the greedy captain had turned his small operation into something much larger, hiring low-level fodder out to clear the upper Civ, charging them a hefty cut. He hired him as a porter again because the old man vouched for him once more. After all, a weak 4 cost nothing to feed and saddened nobody if he died. So he spent his days carrying heavy bags up and down the steep terraces. While E ranks and the occasional D rank claimed the kills, he chose to play the fool, acting like a weakling who got lucky with 1 kill, but secretly he watched. He analyzed everything. That was the only type of education he ever trusted. That day he memorized the exact tier structure from system screens and guild criers. Positioned near the rim, F rank was anything under 100 mana, pure disposable fodder. Most dead players had been F rank. E rank started at 100 and D at 1,000, C at 10,000, B at 100,000, A at 1,000,000, and S at 10 million. That ultimate rank belonged to exactly 10 people in the entire world, the crier mentioned. They had the largest doubling on the first day, forming an exclusive club that never changed because no rank ever shifted. The crier spoke of those 10 monsters like uncontrollable weather, a permanent force you plan your life around and never try to challenge. He just listened, quietly running calculations that no one else in the pit could ever dream of doing, because nobody else had a secret stat of 256. Now get this, if his crazy double-day progress continued for just 1 more day, he would completely bypass the E rank threshold before most players finished their first contract. But the insults started flying again, because every community needs someone at the very bottom. His public rank of 4 made him the ultimate target for everyone's jokes. By the second run, the team joked that they should count him as luggage rather than a human, since a hunter worth only 4 mana was barely worth tracking. Soon, a sharp-tongued E rank woman who fancied herself the group wit started calling him F rank for free labor, the kind of cheap help you pay in scraps. He just smiled and took the insults. A guy who has weighed shame against death knows exactly which bargain to make. The teasing cost him absolutely nothing, and the low profile it provided was worth far more than their pitiful scrap payments. It allowed him to slowly gather critical advantages without drawing any unwanted attention. He even quietly used his knowledge to save the arrogant woman from her own mistakes, secretly warning her away from a dangerous monster nest that she had completely missed. She accepted his advice but kept her nasty attitude, which suited him just fine. They fed him the leftover ward stones from their runs to keep their lucky porter from wandering off to a better team. He let them think they were keeping him. What he was building was a stake out of their condescension, 1 ward stone at a time, and every stone banked his dead weight quietly into a purse the force said he could not own. The clearing run that morning took them up onto a terrace. The captain's scouts had marked as light, with just a few F-rank minions and nothing heavier. The captain let the weakest of his roster bleed themselves on it for the experience, meaning the 2 true rankers went up front while he trailed with the frame. One of the front pair froze when a husk pup broke from a crevice at his hip cheap iron slipping in his hands, and the captain was a terrace. Wei shouting and completely useless. The pup was nothing, a low F-rank minion the system used to teach reflexes, but the boy in front of it was a true F-rank with 70 mana. And a real chance of dying. He was the only one in reach, so he shoved the loading bar right through the creature without breaking stride, one flat swing that should have only staggered it, instead burst it against rock, 256 mana. Behind an iron bar slamming onto a low F-rank, leaving nothing left to survive. The boy stared at the wet smear, then at him, and he gave him that dumb luck face again, muttering in that flat tone all porters used at the pup had practically run right onto the bar, telling him to watch his footing. He believed him because the number 4 over his head made the truth impossible. The captain arrived, sizing up the dead pup, the shaking novice, and the lowly porter, who had somehow ended a husk pup with a carrying bar, loudly deciding that the worthless porter had just gotten lucky twice, and that 2 flukes did not make a fighter, only a lucky porter. The entire group burst out laughing. He let them because the alternative to being mocked was being measured, and the day he is measured in the sieve is the day a guild crier sends his name up a chain ending somewhere he never wants to go, so he quietly carried the bags down, took his porter's cut and said nothing. That night he started filling in the law. He had only half understood on his own panel, because a guild crier at the rim was selling the secrets to anyone who would trade a ward stone for the tale. The crier's law was this, and the ward stone he spent on it was the best trade he made. All week the stamp is fixed, referring to that double figure from the first morning, and honestly nothing they do ever moves it, not training, not relics, not kills. Because the board only ever shows that day 1 number, but a hunter's real mana can grow slowly like an E-rank grinding toward the top of E-rank over long months, and the system watches the gap between a hunter's real mana and their stamp through something the criers called the decree ceiling, grow true power a little past that stamp, and the ceiling lets it slide. The crier said it easily forgives a hard grinding E-rank who runs a hair over their threshold, push far past that stamp, though climbing where a stamp says they have absolutely no right to be, and the ceiling flags them. That is when the dreaded cap auditors arrive, and they do not even fight. They tithe the target, they null their mana down to a clean 0, taking whatever is left, which is to say they end them. The crier claimed he saw it once, a lucky D-rank who pulled a relic and spiked himself up toward B-rank in a week, flagged within days, gone within the hour. No body, no ledger row, just a name that stopped. He handed over the ward stone, slipping off into the dark at the barrier's edge. He sat down alone, running the absolute worst math of his life. The crier had described an E-rank barely scraping past a threshold, but that was definitely not him. He was a stamp 4 whose real mana had multiplied 64 times in 2 nights, and showed no signs of stopping. If the ceiling caught a D-rank reaching for rank B, it would happen soon. Everything in him after 11 years of pricing extreme risk told him the exact same thing. A rare catastrophic outcome is the only one that matters, and his was guaranteed and accelerating fast, so he made the only choice the numbers allowed, which was to hide. Never again would he let his output read past what a lucky F-rank could fake. He would carry bags where the joke and keep the gap between his real power and public score buried deep. That no ceiling, no crier, and no auditor would ever look at the dead weight stamped at the bottom of the world, sitting there in the dark building the cage he meant to live in. He remembered one detail on his own panel that the crier's law could not explain, and it simply would not go away. No matter how he fought it, the ceiling flags growth past a designated stamp, and auditors erase the anomaly that trips it. That is the clean, total rule, a system correcting anything that climbs out of its assigned box, but his own private line on. The first morning was never flagged and never corrected. Instead, it told him plainly that his real mana would square every cycle without limits, and in the same breath it warned him that growth beyond his rank violated the ceiling, and instead of stopping the violation built directly into him, it actually advised him to conceal it. The system had not tried to fix the biggest anomaly in existence. It had literally coached him on hiding it. A machine built to erase risers looked at the biggest riser it would ever produce and quietly told him to keep his head down. Honestly, why would a system built for harvesting protect its own glaring mistake? Its own crimes? He did not have the full answer yet. All he had was the dread sitting cold in his chest, right beside the numbers 4, 16, and 256. He carried both into sleep. The The fourth cycle resolved while he was still half asleep, and this time he felt the panel before he even read it, a small pressure behind his eyes eased the moment he came fully awake. By morning, the private line had stopped being a number he could say in one piece. It read 4 billion. And changed 10 digits where there were only 3 the morning before, 256. Squared up into a figure that filled his entire view, and the rank beside it no longer showed a letter grade, only a flat note that his real mana stood past. Rank S with absolutely no limit above it. The public board read 4. He lay there in the quiet pre-dawn with those two numbers side by side, the smallest stamp in the world, backed by a private pool that had just outrun every rank imaginable. He finally let his calculation settle after leaving it open for 2 days. 4, 16. Then 256, then 65,000 yesterday, and now past 4 billion, he had pretended. And you can't blame him for ignoring it, because seeing it meant believing it. But the cleanest curve he had ever calculated, each morning's mana was the previous morning's mana multiplied by itself, the value squared, not doubled the way the system's decree had doubled everyone on the first day before freezing them. Completely static, it squared every cycle, compounding without any ceiling whatsoever, and an actuary knows in his bones what an uncapped square does to a starting number. Given just a little time, it quickly runs off the edge of any scale. 8 billion people had been given a single double upgrade and locked there. But he had just been handed the only engine in the realm that never stops. Yet he had spent 2 whole days carrying their bags and apologizing for his own luck. That morning, he noticed his body was quietly changing alongside his panel. Quietly transforming overnight, his face in the standing water at the pool was no longer the hollow, fragile ghost he had seen on day 1, a total transformation. His cheekbones had filled in, his color had returned, replacing that defeated gray look. And when he flexed his hands, his tendons stood strong without their usual frailty. He had carried that weakness his whole adult life. Then, a crier mentioned it in passing. But he had not weighed it. In this system, a body matches its rank. Real mana reshapes the flesh itself. The top rankers are tall, muscular, and commanding, hard to look away from, while the low ranks stay thin and brittle. His actual rank had crossed S rank overnight, and his body was already starting to catch up. The physical change was still small, like a man recovering from a hard month with good food. But he knew exactly what this meant, just like he understood the mathematical curve. Soon, the weak joke of a man stamped 4 would stand before his doubters. But first, he desperately needed a quiet, isolated place to test his massive new stat numbers, where no one could watch him since the settlement rim was packed. So he decided to buy his way out. A guild crier was selling dungeon tokens. These led to low dungeons nearby, and he traded his saved porter earnings to secure an entry token to a dangerous E-rank dungeon called the Cinder Warren. It was a burning maze rated as a tough solo run for strong E-ranks. But for an F-rank, it meant certain death. Naturally, he decided to enter it completely alone. Level 4 buying a solo token drew a loud laugh from the crier. The crier cheerfully warned that the realm would offer no refunds if he burned. He simply agreed it was fair and walked away before his filling frame drew suspicion. At the dungeon entrance, his system panel suddenly did something completely new. He realized he had earned this by facing a threat far above his rank. The glowing entry sigil hovering over the massive gate was no longer mere decoration. It unfolded itself, revealing a hidden set of data meant only for him. This new feature gave him a perfect, clean preview of every danger waiting past the gate. It showed the true threat level, along with the count of monsters inside, including room layouts and extreme temperatures that would have boiled an ordinary F-rank alive. The system named this secret, new function for him on a private line, a sigil preview that showed him the danger before he took a step. As a former actuary, his entire life had been spent trying to price invisible risks. Now the system had handed him a tool to price those risks instantly. He stood there in silence, letting a deep wave of gratitude wash over him. For a man who intended to clear dangerous ground without holding the proper rank to enter. Knowing the danger beforehand was worth more than the sharpest legendary sword. The Cinder Warren was rated a tough E-rank run, but felt like a minor chore. The maze breathed out a suffocating, intense heat that should have cracked his skin instantly. Yet he barely sweated, because 4 billion mana easily shrugs off any flame. He barely feels the furnace heat as minions swarm the burning corridors. Just as the sigil promised, cinder hounds and slag beasts rush forward. These beasts would kill an E-rank party, but he crushes them with cheap iron. He brought the cheap weapon in, barely tapping into his massive mana pool because he was learning to control his output, testing how little of his power he needed to make the kill look like an easy, ordinary day. Meanwhile, the boss waited. Inside the maze's heart, a massive monster of fused coal, the kind of fight that dungeon criers recruit whole parties for. Honestly, this moment felt entirely different. Because it was the first time in his life he actually felt important. He had been weak his entire life, a frail porter who valued other people's power for a living, mocked on his first morning and every morning since. Now he walks up to a dungeon boss that strong hunters respected, breaking it apart with an effort that left him breathing easily. In that brief, fleeting moment, he felt strong, truly strong, with no weak stats to hide and no need to act weak in front of anyone, but he quickly crushed that pride just like his strikes, because showing off is how cautious men get killed. Still, the dungeon tried to kill him once, proving that a smart survivor never lets his guard down. He knows a clean run does not mean safety. Deep inside the burning maze, a collapsed trap triggered. The sigil flashed warning amber instead of deadly red. A slab of fused coal dropped where his old, frail body would have been too slow to dodge. But he blocked it reflexively with his forearm. The heavy stone shattered against his skin, feeling like nothing more than a gentle shove. This is exactly the real danger of having stats that far outstrip the threat. Part of him still flinched from a lifetime of being weak, while the newly awakened part had absolutely no reason to worry. He noted that hesitation, recognizing the gap between his old fears and his current reality. The moment he stops flinching is the day he starts relying on his massive power in public, and doing that is the exact mistake that gets hunters killed, so he keeps the flinch. It acts as his safety valve. He walks the rest of the warren, pretending to be weak just as he would pretend to everyone else. He clears the cinder warren and loots it alone, a secret the criers never tell the groups they sell tokens to. A solo run lets him keep every relic and coin. A guild would split 12 ways. Inside the warren's heart, he finds a tally cash. It rewards him with a clutch of manacores and a heat warded relic. An E-rank guild would kill for, plus enough coin that a poor porter who used to work for scraps suddenly has a real fortune. He bags it all onto his own back, the same back that carried other men's wardstones for 3 days. He walks out of the gate past the same crier, maintaining his tired slouch, carrying a heavy haul that no ordinary Frank had any business lifting. The crier assumed he stole the items and ran, and he let him. Back at the rim, he slept deeply, the loot safe, as the numbers finally settled in his mind. 4 to 6 to 250. 6 to 65,000 to 4 billion, each figure squaring the last value. Yet every morning the public board still lists his level as 4, but his body and his system start to belong to someone else. He wakes on the 5th morning feeling a stranger sharing his body, knowing it even before he looks in a mirror. Because the cycle had resolved past anything his status panel could handle. His private screen did not even try to print a clean figure, it just showed a 1, followed by a string of digits so long the screen cut it off, a number 19 places. Deep and still climbing. While his rank was past S rank yesterday, it now read only a flat note saying no rank applied. No instrument in this world was built to count this high. He had stopped being just a man with a high score. He had become a value the system itself refused to write down, while the public board, faithful as ever, still printed for him. His body had finished what it started. He found a polished ward plate at a guild stall and used it as a mirror. The man looking back was not the same guy from his last tally. He was lean, with broad shoulders, a sharp jaw, and a frame carrying the easy weight of someone the Apex elites would nod to in a hallway. Nothing in his face connected to the gaunt joke a starter party had laughed into the Civ 4 days ago. He stood there testing his new look, because an untrusted disguise is worse than no disguise at all. Soon the world tested it for him. A moment later, the old porter from his cash runs walked past the stall close enough to brush his arm. The same man who had vouched for the dead weight twice and clapped him on the back. His eyes slid over him with no more interest than he gave the stall. Behind him, a handsome stranger and nothing more. So the very first person who had ever known him looked straight through him. Talk about a perfect disguise. He got a second identity for free and took it without a single second thought. A man who is going to spend the rest of his life hiding a crime needs 2 faces, and he had just been given one that no tool and no memory could ever tie to. The registry, on paper, he was still the thin F-rank nobody, a man of 4 rank F, a name on the FD rolls that nobody would ever cross-reference. Against a tall freelancer out in the wild, in the field, he was an unknown. The criers had no file on. The two would never meet in anyone's mind because the only thread between them was a truth that could not be spoken aloud without the speaker paying a heavy price. He changed absolutely nothing about his clothes, but altered everything about his movements, walking out into the world as someone else entirely. His 5th day went to turning this engine into a massive fortune, because a number that cannot be printed is worthless until converted into things the system can actually read and respect, and the things a board respects are gear, gold, and a quiet reputation for clearing dungeons just slightly above what the strong can manage. He bought solo tokens to see ranked dungeons under his new face and cleared them the way he cleared the Warren, a few tiers below his real power. His wins looked like the very good days of a strong unknown, never like the impossible runs of a god. He throttled every single strike down to the modest size of an ordinary, excellent clear. C-rank dungeons are built for full parties of practice C-rankers, but he walked them alone. That meant every core, relic, and coin a guild would split 40 ways ended up entirely in his hands. Then he bought a B-rank token, the kind merchants only sell to established guilds, and never to a lone walker. He cleared that B-rank dungeon alone, the same careful way, and his haul was a small treasury. A man with that much gold and a crime to hide needs someone who launders rather than counts, and he found. He tracked down that kind of broker by putting word out in the gear black market. A whisper went out that an unknown freelancer had high-value loot and zero patience for guild politics. The broker who responded was a pretty quiet operator running a dozen separate fronts. Operating across safe zones, the man asked no questions except what his cut was and how fast. He demanded speed, a fair deal, and promised an immediate blacklist if crossed. The broker believed him because only men who mean it make threats like that. Soon his goods were laundered through one shell and his relics through another. His coin went through a third, and what came back to him was clean gold and perfect standing. Not a single thread led back to him in the ledger books. In a single day, the poorest branded man in the entire world. The dead weight, the absolute joke of a starter party who had laughed him out of the room. Talk about a massive glow-up, right? Not a soul on the board knew it. This major conversion taught the system something new, just like his solo clear did. And the panel unlocked a new function while the first payout was still settling. It named the function convert, explaining in plain text exactly what it did. The feature let him spend raw mana directly to purchase durable assets. He could buy gear, gold, and warded constructs with value pulled from a hidden pool. Value that a ledger merely listed without ever questioning where it came from. For a man whose entire survival depended on hiding his true status, this new convert function was the absolute keystone to his safety. It transformed his massive, uncountable power into wealth that left no trace. As the function resolved, he understood this was how he would scale his hiding. Not by spending less of his power pool, but by changing its shape entirely. He would spend it into forms the world could never track. At dusk, he crossed a market. Blending easily into the safe zone crowd, his haul was converted and his face disguised. Talk about terrible luck. The single person in the world who could ruin everything suddenly found him. She was a top-ranked appraiser, the kind paid in rare relics by the guilds. They hired her to read a candidate's true strength, and he knew what she was immediately. The moment her gaze locked onto him, her eyes did something no one else had done. In 5 days, her eyes did not slide off. They stopped and held, reading him. Reading past his disguise, past his casual posture as a strong freelancer, and past whatever soft limits he had placed around his massive pool. She saw the true figure underneath, the 119 digits deep and climbing. He watched the color completely drain from her face in real time. She was Yun Chiang. Although he would not learn her name until later, her unique talent was terrifying. She could read a person's true mana through any stamp or disguise. That made her the only human alive who saw exactly what he was. He was just pretending to be ordinary. For one long beat, they stared at each other. She read his secret crime while he watched her uncover the truth. Every worst-case scenario ran through his mind: a shout, a report to the authorities, a direct alert to the auditors. But then, she did the one thing he had not predicted. She kept her mouth shut, turned around, and walked back into the crowd. Absolutely nothing was said, and he did not chase her because that would be a mistake. Running after her would only show she made the wrong choice letting him live. Instead, he stood in the square and calculated this new risk like any other. She was cold and highly calculating. An appraiser of her elite rank never worked alone. Guilds paid her handsomely to evaluate players before they ever hired or fought them. She had every reason to sell out a target whose true level could not be measured. Yet she chose absolute silence. Silence is incredibly cheap when it costs nothing. But keeping a secret that costs you a literal fortune, that is a different story. She walked away from a massive payout. Later, when he pressed the broker for answers, he only got her trade name and a warning that she served no master. Her eyes read truer than any device the 10 owned. He quietly filed her away, on the same mental shelf as the system's strange warning to hide his power. It pointed to a hidden, massive mystery, so he let her walk. Sleep did not come easily that night, and not because of that mysterious woman. She saw his worst secret and she walked away. It was a massive risk. That made her an unpredictable threat, but also an unexplained act of completely pure mercy. He logged her in his mind as another strange anomaly pointing toward something far bigger than himself, yet the real reason he stayed awake was much colder. The system had granted him endless power, but kept the one thing he needed. To grasp it, he would have to walk directly toward his own destruction. His successful runs had essentially bought him absolute control over the lower realm. With his disguised face, he could easily solo any low-tier dungeon entirely alone. He could launder the loot and build a massive fortune through shell companies. For just a moment, that quiet life actually started to feel normal. But here is the catch: the real answers were never going to be that easy. He needed to know the dark truth behind this system of greed. The corruption ran deep, built on massive crimes that the world hid away. None of those hidden secrets could ever be bought or uncovered in a basic B-rank run. All real secrets sat behind elite rank, completely locked away. When he finally pressed the broker for the location of the true secrets, the man confirmed his worst fear. The path led to a terrifying place. They lay inside restricted A rank and S-rank dungeons guarded by the 10. These were not the easily ignored runs found in the lower areas. The elite dungeons were heavily monitored by high-level authorities. The broker warned him that the 10 guarded their treasury with ruthless auditors. In those deep zones, the system regulations were absolute, and inspectors watched. They kept constant watch over the logs of every single restricted clear. Yet that was exactly where a hidden hunter had to go for answers. But one overpowered strike on the record would instantly trigger their alarms. The system would deploy a massive sweep team in under an hour. He calculated every angle. Still, the math did not change. Clearing an A-rank dungeon alone, easy, a total breeze. Surviving the aftermath was the real trap because a low-rank solo runner. Exiting restricted ground normally cleared by elite teams would instantly raise red flags. The relentless auditors would immediately investigate the absurd numbers they would see. On his combat log would instantly expose him. There was no escape. So he could not enter as himself, nor as some powerful unknown rogue. No unranked outsider is ever given a permit to enter those dungeons alone. His clean face or how heavy his purse was, restricted dungeons admitted only. The high-ranking rosters the guilds vouched for, only elite A-rank parties were allowed through the gate. There was exactly one way onto that ground that did not require a rank he could never obtain. But wait, there was one single slot on an A-rank roster that would let an F-ranked hunter stand in. The broker named it the way someone names a thing they expect to be refused. Porter, the baggage slot, the menial bottom of the roster, the hired hauler an arrogant A-rank party brings to carry the cores and relics out so the fighters never dirty their hands. It was the one position on a restricted raid that would let a low stamp body fill because a porter is not counted as a clearer and never reads on the combat logs at all. He does not fight. Nothing he does registers as a strike. He is invisible to the exact security that would flag him because the watch is built to read the people who matter. In this realm, a porter is just someone who does not, and honestly, the broker offered it to him as a joke. An A-rank party from one of the mid-guilds was hiring a baggage porter for a restricted run and paying in scraps. Surely a freelancer with his prior clears had no use for hauling another man's bags, but he had hauled bags before. For 3 days in the Civ, while his real power outgrew the realm, he had learned there that the most valuable thing a low-stamped man can own is the Certainty of everyone around him that he does not matter. The porter slot was that. Same certainty scaled up to the only ground he could not otherwise reach. Crazy, right? He would walk into a watched A-rank dungeon as the bag mule of a party that would spend the whole run despising him. He would carry their cores on a frame the way he had carried the captain's ward stones from the back of the roster. Where no log reads and no auditor looks, he would quietly carry the entire raid. The fighters would take the credit, and he would take the answers, not one of them. Not the party, not the gate, nor the watch would ever count the porter as anything but four, so Soji went back to the broker before dawn and took the deal. The contract was a single page of guild boilerplate, with the porter's terms spelled out small: no share of glory, half a share of the scraps, all the risk, and none of the rank, signed under a thin, plain name on the registry because a porter is hired off the fodder rolls and never off the field. He read every line of it the way he read everything, and then he signed his name, M. Soji. Stamped 4 dead weight. The guild crier stamped the roster and told him to be at the restricted gate by the next bell with his frame and his mouth shut. Because the party did not like to be kept waiting by the help, now he stands at that gate. The A-rank party is gathered right ahead of him. Their good gear loud and easy, already laughing about the upcoming run, just like the captain's crew laughed in the sieve. Not one of them looks at the porter twice. Ahead of them, the restricted dungeon's mouth hangs wide open. Dark throat of worked stone, with the auditor's watch held silent over it, and above the gate, the entry sigil is starting to unfold its reading for the only set of eyes in the party that can see it. Empty on his back, the frame weighs nothing at all. The force sits over his head where the whole world can read it, and he shoulders the bags, stepping toward the watch as their bag carrier. He is the one about to carry this entire raid. The sigil over the restricted gate unfolded for his eyes alone while the party was still laughing about the run, showing him what they were walking into before anyone else knew its name. What it showed was a flooded vault, a drowned keep that the old criers called the sunken tally, featuring 3 submerged tiers of worked stone. The water rose and fell on a fixed cycle, keeping to the system beat. The threat count it showed him was something even an A-rank team might not survive intact. It would easily lose a member or two. Drowned wardens patrolled the deep corridors that flooded beasts of the dark water with hooked arms and endless patience. Below the lowest tier, the sigil flagged a single heavy mark in amber. This was a vault keeper the size of a giant gatehouse, waiting for them. The party would reach it completely ruined if they even made it that far. He mapped out the entire run while the captain bragged to his fighters. He claimed the deep cores would pay for a season. Then he shouldered his empty frame. He let his face go completely blank, knowing a porter should only know where to stand. The captain was a big-shot A-rank from the mid-guild, a massive, arrogant man with over 1 million mana to his name and the loud confidence that bought. He ran his roster just like the captain in the Civ had done, deciding everyone's worth out loud before the real work even began. He looked at him at the gate, saw his rank of 4, and told everyone that the guild had sent the absolute cheapest hauler on their entire roster. He was told to stay 3 paces back, keep his mouth shut because a rank 4 in a flooded vault was just 1 slip away from being their first casualty. It would be no loss if he died. The fighters laughed that easy group laugh, the same sound he heard in the pits and would hear in every party he saved. So he gave them the dumb, grateful nod of a porter happy to get scraps. Then the gate took them, shifting the dry ground into a cold stone landing above black water as the sunken tally closed forever over their heads. Went exactly how the arrogant captain wanted, or at least how he thought it went. He quietly manipulated the battlefield from the back while the water was still low. Across the stone floor, and the drowned wardens crept out of flooded side passages. He already had them mapped out on his sigil. The frontline fighters met them head-on, with top-tier gear, taking them down while he trailed behind with the heavy frame. To scoop up the mana cores, for now there was nothing else to do but carry his load. A strong A-rank party clearing the easy rooms of a dungeon does not need a hidden powerhouse saving them. He let the run be theirs. Because if a lowly porter starts playing hero, people are going to ask questions. He kept his head down, watched the rising water, and quietly bided his time. He knew exactly where the captain's math would fail, thanks to his system screen. It showed him the trap 3 rooms ahead. Soon, the water began to rise. As they went deeper, the water on the second tier rose past their knees. Then Their wastes as the system's timer turned these halls into an absolute nightmare. A drowned warden in deep water is a completely different beast to fight. They are faster below the surface and nearly impossible to read. The elite fighters, who easily cleared the shallows, were now reacting a dangerous half-beat too late. The captain shouted formations that the water swallowed, a B-rank hunter on. His flank went under briefly, resurfacing with a curse as a hooked arm lunged. What had started as a simple, highly paid stroll was rapidly devolving into a brutal grind. He spotted the first fatal strike, coming 3 moves before it could even land. A warden slid quietly under the dark surface, near the far side of the wit. The captain kept that sharp-tongued woman up front, unaware that a hooked arm was already drawing back, ready to slash her throat from a blind spot no one noticed. Quickly dropping his heavy cargo frame, the porter prepared to end the monster. He had to make the kill look like a complete, clumsy accident to match his porter disguise. A wardstone pillar landed. The water had completely weakened it. The amber sigil glowed. This unstable pillar gave him the perfect excuse. Splashing through chest-deep water with cargo was the perfect excuse to stumble. He tripped. The massive pillar collapsed right where the warden was rising. A quarter-ton of wet stone fell, guided by a tiny spark of his hidden energy. The strike hit. The warden folded instantly under the crushing weight. It pinned the beast down, its hooked claw frozen inches from the woman's throat. The ruse worked. To the party it looked like sheer, accidental dumb luck. A heavy-handed baggage carrier, accidentally dropping a massive stone on a hidden enemy. Startled by the splash, the female warrior turned to find her potential killer crushed. She saw only their porter splashing in the water, apologizing profusely for his clumsiness. The woman angrily cursed him for almost crushing her head. She never once thought to question why the heavy stone fell at that exact split second. And honestly, who would? No one ever suspects the guy branded as a useless baggage carrier. The captain barked at him to watch his step and stop breaking the dungeon. They marched on, never knowing a faked blunder had saved them. That became his secret routine, but he was walking a razor-sharp tightrope. Every single hidden kill had to look like a random accident or a misfired trap. If any monster died unnaturally, the silent auditors of this restricted ground would investigate the logs. Those silent overseers kept a constant watch over the magic data. The logs never record a porter's stumble, but they definitely record an active strike. Just one strike at his true power level would trigger a massive alert. It would summon a deadly sweep team within the hour. So he never struck directly, choosing to drop weakened pillars instead. He merely loosened the structural stones and let the water drown his targets. He buried the monsters in the wreckage of their own flooded corridors. Every single death appeared entirely natural, never once registering as an actual kill. He suppressed his raw power so deeply, restricting his output to a tiny fraction. Even the highly perceptive Cherang would have struggled to detect such a minute trace of energy. Each rescue was a rigged coin flip, and he varied the tricks. A porter dropping the exact same stone at the exact same moment is a pattern. And after direct strikes, suspicious patterns are the first thing the watch looks for. Miraculously, they reached the 3rd tier with the entire party still breathing. The captain proudly took all the credit, praising his own leadership and guild discipline. But things were about to change as the floodwaters rose to the ceiling. The quiet run was turning into the kind of battle legends are made of. Suddenly, the drowned wardens strike in a pack. 8 of them surge from the dark. Leaving the flooded gallery his sigil had summoned, they strike while the water runs high. When the party is completely exhausted, for the first time, the captain's calculations fail. His assessment only predicted 4 wardens, but 8 of them stand before them. Facing 4 extra drowned wardens as an exhausted A-rank party in deep water means this is not a tough battle, it is a total wipeout, the kind auditors log. As a failed run that swallowed its entire team, from the back he realizes something cold. The very adventurers who mocked the lowly porter are now about to end up as 8 names on a casualty ledger, but then he makes his biggest move yet. Masking it to look like the dungeon is simply destroying itself, the high water. Flooding the gallery is only held back by a system timer and carved stone. But that carved stone has a critical keystone, his sigil previously highlighted. An ancient floodgate holding back the immense lake from the tier below. He slips beneath the surface amid the chaotic warden attack, a falling porter. Getting swept away in deep water is the most normal thing in the world. Reaching out, he places a hand on the keystone and releases a tiny thread of magic to yank it free. The gate does not shatter, but he makes it look as if the ancient stone finally cracked under centuries of extreme pressure, sending the entire gallery rushing down into the tier below in a massive waterfall. The 8 deadly wardens are instantly swept away, dragged away from their prey, crashing down through the submerged ruins into the absolute abyss. The party is pinned against the high stone walls by the sheer force of the drain, completely drenched and bruised, but miraculously alive once the water recedes to ankle depth. The captain struggles to his feet and assumes this disaster was just incredibly lucky timing. He truly believes the dungeon's ancient infrastructure failed right when they needed it. He explains to his team that ancient realms built these vaults to drown intruders, but sometimes ended up drowning themselves instead. The exhausted hunters laugh with shaky relief, knowing they barely escaped death. Meanwhile, the porter lies face down in the shallow water, coughing violently while his empty carrier frame floats nearby. He looks exactly like a helpless victim who survived this disaster by pure luck. Not a single person suspects the hand on the keystone. Honestly, who would look for a savior when he is just a grunt stamped with rank 4 from the floor of the empty chamber, soaking wet and deemed the luckiest survivor? He realizes this hidden carry will work perfectly as long as everyone believes he is completely useless. And indeed it does. Soon, they reach the deep vault past the drained gallery. This is where the massive amber boss mark from his system map resides. By the time they arrive, the party is completely broken, just as the dungeon intended. Out of gear and losing their minds, the captain blusters while his fighters go silent. It is the heavy silence of warriors who know they might not make it out. The Vault Keeper is a massive monstrosity of stone and chain, shaped like a fortress. It is slow but absolutely giant. Normally, an elite squad sacrifices several fighters just to find a single opening in its defenses. The desperate captain gathers his battered crew to do just that, prepared to sacrifice lives he cannot afford to lose. In hopes of finding a weak point, the porter watches him plan a losing battle. Right then, he makes a choice that no low-ranking porter should ever be able to make. He had one golden rule to uphold: this raiding party could not lose a single life. Losing fighters to a boss that a mere porter could easily kill would look pathetic. They would limp out short-handed, complaining about a brutal run, and brutal runs draw attention. That was the exact spotlight he was carrying these heavy bags to completely avoid. They needed to walk out unharmed and bored, proud of their own fake discipline. To pull that off, the Vault Keeper had to die without him ever touching it. So he weaponized the dungeon layout once more, turning the very stone into a trap. The massive Vault Keeper blocked the path to the dungeon's only true treasure cache. This was an A-ranked dungeon, and the captain was desperate to exploit its armor. Standard guides only taught hunters to aim for that specific seam in the boss's shell. But our porter had deciphered a far superior method from the gate sigil outside. The monster was physically anchored to the floor by the dungeon's massive flood channels. These channels operated on a strict system timer, constantly cycling the water levels. Right on schedule, the system was about to flood this chamber to drown anything inside. He patiently waited for the captain to order his elite fighters into the fray. He waited for the tide to rise, blending silently into the dark background. Fiddling with his cargo frame, he stealthily jammed the drain with a stone slab. He made it look like a clumsy, accidental stumble from a clueless baggage carrier. Deprived of its release, the vault flooded rapidly, just like the galleries before. Trapped on the floor by its own structural links, the keeper was utterly helpless. It couldn't escape the rising water and was forced to drown in its home. Unforgiving iron chains kept it pinned under as the freezing water engulfed its skull. Clinging to the highest ledges, the party desperately treaded the rising floodwaters. They watched in utter shock as the terrifying boss easily perished beneath the surface. The arrogant captain immediately assumed the dungeon system had simply glitched in their favor. To him, it was just a mechanical error that ruined the keeper's day. Chuckling with relief, he declared that the ancient designers had drowned their own watchdogs. He boasted to his team that the dungeon was far too clever for itself. But here is the real kicker: what no one in the party realized was the clumsy porter who allegedly blocked the drain had carefully planned every single mishap. He was the mastermind behind the fallen pillar and the broken floodgates. This clean A- rank clear was actually carried entirely by their lowly luggage boy. The very man they paid in miserable scraps. Soon, the waters completely calmed down. The drowned keeper dissolved, leaving behind a wealth of high-tier cores and rare relics. The valuable core lay exposed, and the sealed treasure chest swung wide open. The excited fighters waded in to harvest their massive haul, eager for payday. Their captain proudly took the glory for a victory he didn't actually win. The silent porter stood at the back, preparing his heavy frame for transport. As they piled up the treasure, he smiled knowing they hadn't earned any of it. Not a single member of this arrogant squad had fought for this wealth. Even better, a massive chunk of this treasure was never going to the guild. This was his ultimate prize, an effortless heist executed right under their noses. A porter handles every single item that gets carried out of these vaults. And a captain too arrogant to count his bags would never notice them being light. He had already secured hefty profits from his previous secret dungeon runs. He already had a broker, but a porter's cut of an A-rank run was absolute scraps by contract. But scraps do not build empires, so he stole from the carry instead. Climbing back up through the drained tiers, he used his convert skill as he hauled the load. Drawing a thread of the pool, he turned select cores on the frame into perfect duplicates. Fakes that fooled any guild appraiser short of Churyong himself, he set the duplicates onto the frame and slid the true cores into the secret fold. His convert skill had opened, a fold no board could read, the party walked out of. The sunken dungeon with a full frame of cores, the captain absolutely certain that every core on it was theirs, but they were wrong by the exact margin he had decided. That very night, his broker met him at a black market front 2 safe. Zones away, converting the true cores into clean gold that no ledger could ever trace. It couldn't be linked to a porter, a freelancer, or a rank 4, a run paying scraps on paper. Actually paid him a massive fortune in secret, untraceable, and recorded only in his own head. The legend started right after that third run, because the world builds myths of its own. It builds them from patterns the watch can see, but the truth never reaches. So he took the lowly porter slot on 3 more restricted parties from mid-tier guilds. Because the deep answers he wanted were scattered across several watched vaults. And besides, a man who is incredibly good and cheap at a thankless job gets hired. Every single party he joined walked out of their dungeons completely intact and safe. They were smugly certain of their own genius, returning to the rim to brag about it. Soon those rumors took shape, and the local criers began spreading the wild stories. Word spread that certain restricted runs had been getting strangely lucky of late. Vaults were drowning their own guardians, failing their floodgates at the exact moment. To save the parties trapped inside, a whole wave of dangerous A-rank dungeons suddenly seemed kinder than their ratings for no reason anyone could possibly explain. They called it a phantom carry, a bizarre streak of luck following specific rosters. Guilds argued over whether the old world's dungeons were decaying and getting softer, or if a new relic in circulation was somehow fouling the watched ground. Yet get this, not a single guild ever suspected the humble porter, who had been on every single roster simply because he was stamped a rank 4. And a rank 4 does not carry anyone. He listened to them construct a ghost. Out of his work, keeping his mouth shut and his frame ready, he let the world believe in a haunting rather than a man. A ghost is one thing auditors cannot tithe. On the 5th of those runs, the captain made a cruel sport of him. He welcomed it, knowing that a captain who is busy laughing at his porter isn't watching him closely. He was a vain, arrogant A-rank who loved having an audience, standing at the gate. He mocked him, telling his fighters the guild sent a rank 4 bag carrier as a joke. He warned them the useless porter would only slow them down in the deep water. Becoming easy food for the first warden that got tired of real meat, the team laughed. Long and one of them flicked a heavy wardstone right at his chest, telling him to practice catching. Carrying was all a rank 4 could do, but he caught it and fumbled it back into his straps, giving them a dumb, grateful grin. That simple grin was the heart of his disguise, and it cost him absolutely nothing. Inside the dungeon, another drowned vault like the last one, the captain kept mocking him. The entire time. For 2 tiers, the captain mocked his clumsy mistakes to the fighters whenever he stumbled. The more the captain talked, the freer his hands became, because a man being watched as a total joke is someone whose every real movement is seen as a slip-up, so he let the captain enjoy his little joke, silently clearing the run under his nose. On the 3rd tier, a warden crept up from the deep water, right where the other fighters could not see it. A hooked arm was already drawing back, aimed directly below the captain's ribs. The captain who had spent the run mocking him was now one breath away from becoming a corpse. The porter dropped the ward's stone thrown at him, tossing that same stone right into the channel to foul the warden's track. Like some clumsy accident, and the brutal architecture of the dungeon claimed the warden as it always did. He spun around. He found his killer crushed in the channel while the stamp four was floundering around in the water, apologizing for dropping that stone. Near him, the captain cursed him for nearly braining him with that clumsiness, and never once thanked that clumsy blunder for his continued survival. Drawing at the rim that night, the captain bragged about the run as his own genius. He was the genius who read the water and survived a warden. At him, meanwhile, the porter he had laughed at carried the bags out and banked another fortune through the broker. The man who had been saved was the one in the world most certain he had saved himself, but another run nearly fell apart completely. It fell undone by a sharp fighter, not the dungeon guards, a risk the porter had priced lowest and should have priced highest. The party was from a far sharper guild than standard adventurers, and its second was a ranked duelist who had survived more restricted runs than the captain, carrying the heavy weariness survival teaches somewhere in the second tier of a dry, deadly, clockwork gauntlet of a dungeon, filled with gears and falling blades timed to a clock instead of water. The duelist began watching the porter closely. The porter had just killed a gear warden by fouling its track with a dropped frame bar, a clean accident, and the duelist had been looking the wrong way to see the accident, but the right way to see the result. What he saw was a dead gear warden with no fighter nearby, and the useless porter rising from a stumble, just a bit too smoothly for a man stamped for in a dungeon that easily ate elites. He never said a word to the captain because a duelist who has survived this long never hands a half-formed suspicion to a loud captain who will just laugh it off. Instead, he kept the porter in the corner of his eye, and a porter watched like that is always one single step away from exposure. So he quickly smothered the suspicion by acting even worse at his job. He let the next two gear wardens get far closer to the party than they ever needed before the traps killed them. He even let a falling blade clip his pack, dragging half the hallway down a gear shaft. He played the clumsy role so loudly that the duelist had to weigh a useless man who just cost them loot against some hidden mastermind who was secretly clearing their path. Clumsy and costly one, because that is exactly what a useless stamp for is expected to be. By the third tier, the duelist finally stopped watching him. He had bought his safety back the only way possible, by acting out the exact worthlessness his cheap stamp promised, walking out of the gauntlet that night having nearly been spotted, having sacrificed a massive share of the loot to stay hidden. He counted the loss. He played cheap because the day a duelist actually measures the porter is the day the porter dies. She was on the next roster, and he analyzed her presence long before reading the run. An appraiser at a restricted gate is the one wild variable no magic seal can hide. The guild hired an expert appraiser onto this raid to value all the deep treasures before the captain split the loot, a standard move for the absolute wealthiest guilds. Their reader was that same woman from the market square, Yun Cheong. She was a top-ranked appraiser whose sharp eyes had locked onto him in the crowd. His stomach dropped. He spotted her at the gate, and things were suddenly razor-thin. Up until now, every trick he disguised as an accident in front of the fighters, and the suspicious duelist had worked only because they could not see his true power. Yet here she was, the only human alive who could read his true numbers, standing just 8 feet away, hired to appraise absolutely everything they found on this run. Adjusting his heavy carry frame, he gave the captain a mindless, blank nod. Across the gate, she caught his eye, just a split second, but she did not pale. She had already gotten over the initial shock of learning exactly what he was. Staring at the level 4 display hovering over his head, she looked at his porter gear, then turned to the captain, speaking in the dry, professional tone of a hired expert. She declared the hauler completely sound, clearing the roster to enter the dungeon. Not a single detail about the massive power level filling her vision crossed her lips. The gate swallowed them. She kept his secret, but doing it actively was a different gamble. In the market square, her silence had only cost her a bounty she skipped. But on this official roster, keeping quiet meant risking her entire professional career. She was failing to deliver the exact appraisal she was contracted to give. A respectable appraiser is supposed to read every single party member and report it. Instead, she stared at an absolute monster disguised as a porter and lied Telling the captain the porter is fine meant she was lying to protect a stranger. He worked the run, slipped into the background, just like all the others. Ruining a monster here, sabotaging a trap there, taking lives without ever landing a blow. And he constantly felt her presence at the flank, analyzing every core he touched. She watched the wardens collapse near him. Through all of it, she said absolutely nothing. But twice she did way more than stay silent when a rookie fighter turned around at the worst moment and almost caught him moving with impossible speed. She quickly distracted the fighter by announcing a treasure value half a beat early. The fighter looked away from him, the danger passed, and everyone kept moving. Later, the captain counted the loot and wondered aloud why the deep cache felt light. The guild scouts had promised much more deep treasure than what they actually found. She quickly offered a flat, professional explanation about the ancient dungeon vaults and decaying cores, shifting his suspicion to the environment. He blamed the architecture instead of the bags. Her cover-up held perfectly. She protected him from the one angle no accidental trick could ever cover. The perspective of someone who actually understood what they were looking at. And she did it without a single word, avoiding any trace the guards could track. They reached a silent understanding on that run without ever speaking a word. That is the only kind of alliance someone in his dangerous position can afford. Descending further into the lower tier of the dungeon, she quietly fell into step. She leaned near his carrier frame for a moment, close enough to speak under the roaring water. She did not speak of his secret number, choosing instead to whisper in the clipped tone of an appraiser reporting a hazard the captain's guild had hired. 2 appraisers for this run, but the second was an auditor's spy sent to monitor restricted clearances. That spy had just been pulled at the last moment and would join the guild's next roster. The porter needed to sell his contract before that happened and escape. It was a vital warning masked as a routine hazard report. It was the most valuable gift he had received. Since buying the law from the crier, she was not only keeping his secret, she was actively watching his back, an appraiser reading true mana. Spots planted auditors just like a hidden riser in a dungeon, he told her. In the flat, low mutter of a porter, reporting a load that his frame would avoid. The next roster, in response, she gave him the absolute smallest nod possible and stepped back to the captain's side. Their partnership was sealed with 2 warnings. And a simple nod, no names, no open declarations. A declaration would only draw the attention of the watch. What grew between them after that developed silently. Through shared danger without a single word spoken, it was simple and direct. Because any sign of attachment would let the watch read it on their faces. They completed 3 more restricted runs, using those identical rosters. Over the next few shifts, the guild kept pairing their elite appraiser with this cheap, reliable porter. Soon, the pairing was no longer just a coincidence. On every run, she scanned the watch while he cleared the dungeon. For the party, together, they led 4 separate groups out of 4 restricted vaults safely. The oblivious adventurers felt like geniuses. She learned how. He controlled his power and timed her early cache readings to his exact half-beats. He learned to recognize the subtle tell she gave when an auditor's spy was on the roster. She would put a certain cold flatness into her report of their strength when the group held a watcher she could spot and he could not. They never met outside the gates and never mentioned his level, once at the rim. After their 3rd run, she slipped a folded piece of paper into his carrier strapping without breaking her stride. The folded note contained the names of 2 guilds where the auditors had placed spies during that shift. She was already 3 paces away by the time he opened it, and that was everything. Just a paper slip in his straps and a back disappearing into the crowd. Standing there, he realized that he was no longer fighting this battle alone. Having an ally was both the most terrifying and beautiful thing to happen to him since day 1. His big breakthrough came on a run where his body nearly collapsed, all thanks to the cover she provided. They were deep inside a crumbling, decaying ruin of a vault, where the system's clock triggered massive collapses and brought the ceilings down. Tier by tier, down on the final floor, the party encountered a massive threat his sigil had flagged earlier, a reliquary warden the size of the Deepkeeper, waiting inside a chamber. None of the fighters could defeat the warden before the roof fell. A total collapse meant certain death, which would bring the watch down to inspect the site and discover why. The only way to save them was a single, devastating blow that was powerful enough to drop the warden fast before the clock finished, a real strike on restricted ground would register with the watch. It would end him. He needed that strike to Read as a complete collapse, just one single blow, it simply cannot. Look like a falling ceiling, a cave-in means 100 separate. Impacts, a strike is just one, he needed 100 of himself, the one true strike. Had to drown in a massive flood of throwaway force, no instrument could. Pull his signature out of the noise, the thought finished, the warden rose. The ceiling cracked, and Churyong was already turning the fighter's eyes to the wrong wall. The panel answered him with a new function, matching every need he had grown into. Conjure surplus it was called, it told him what to do in the flat language of the system. He could spend his pool on thousands of crude, throwaway, expendable constructs. Conjured and discarded faster than any board could track, force without a name. His pool was so deep that wasting 1,000 constructs cost him absolutely nothing. He conjured them in the cracking dark, a flood of crude stone fists that he made through and let fail by the hundreds. Inside the storm, he buried the one true strike that killed the Ryokwari warden. So the warden fell not under a single readable blow, but under 100 nameless impacts the exact instant the ceiling came down. The watch reading the log only saw a collapse, a roster caught in a falling vault that lost its guardian to the same stone that nearly took the party. Churyong, who could read the truth of it through any noise, was the only one in the realm who knew the collapse was planned. She gave the captain her flat, quiet praisers report that the Ryokwari had fallen on its own clock, taking its warden with it. The captain crawled out of the rubble, counting his survivors, and calling it the unluckiest lucky run of his career. He crawled out with the hardy coated in stone dust, his frame half crushed, the hull scattered, and a porter's worthless luck was the only explanation anyone could find. At the gate, she passed him without a word. She read him top to bottom the way she had in the market square. Whatever she read in that new function, in the wider pool behind it, she hid it behind her flat appraiser's face and walked out into the bells. He understood that he had just grown a tool wide enough to hide a god inside a falling roof, and the only person who would ever know it was there had already decided not to speak. Announcement came down over every set of eyes in the realm at once, just like the decree had come down on the first morning. He read it, standing at the rim with the frame on his back, cold settled in deep before the flat voice had finished. The twofold decree authority announced a mandatory re-rank assessment of the entire surviving population to be conducted on a new instrument called the Reckoner, and trust me, this next line turned a simple nuisance into a death sentence. It named what the Reckoner measured. A stamp from the first morning had measured the doubled value of a person's innate mana and frozen it. This new instrument, the voice said, measured a person's real mana as it stood now, the true present pool behind the frozen stamp. Every survivor in the realm, every survivor would file through, their true stats read and logged against their official stamps. There would be no exemptions, no deferrals, and absolutely no way to escape. Any survivor failing to show up at a Reckoner station before the closing bell would be flagged absent. This was getting dangerously close, and his board still read 4. In reality, his true power pool was a 1 followed by countless, endless digits. It was a number so massive, the screen itself couldn't even display it. Now, they built a machine designed to match that hidden power to his name. He calculated the risks coldly, standing right at the edge of the crowd. All around him, other survivors erupted in sheer panic at the sudden orders. For most of them, this measurement was just a basic formality, and they knew it. Their stats had barely moved since day 1, staying completely static at their base pools. An E rank who ground for weeks would only show a tiny expected increase past their stamp. A D rank with a lucky relic would show a slight boost above their stamp. These were normal, honest gains that the system easily forgave without any flags. The scanner would quickly log these static crowds and wave them right through. After all, this stagnant population was exactly what the system's laws wanted. They were a frozen society, doubled once, then capped by system laws. And yet, finding a stagnant population was not what the Reckoner was built for. This machine was not built to find the expected, it was made to hunt. It wanted the impossible anomalies, the survivor whose power pool had climbed too far. A level of growth that no grinding or relics could ever explain. In this entire world, there was exactly one survivor with that kind of profile. His hidden rank went so far beyond his stamp, no screen could write it. He was the exact target this machine was built to catch. Talk about intense. She tracked him down before the next bell, hidden inside a shady black market. She met him in a broker's back room. Her usual calm was completely gone. Her usual facade was completely shattered by the gravity of her terrifying message. Through her guild connections, she had discovered the true design of this device. She warned him that this reevaluation was just a clever cover story. The re-rank was the bait, the catch was the true purpose. The authority behind it was not the standard office, but the auditors. They had commissioned a device to hunt down a specific, massive anomaly. Something had been triggering system alarms for weeks without being located. The auditors knew someone was rapidly breaking past every level cap. They could sense the rapid climb, but they had no idea who was doing it. He was perfectly hidden behind a fake rank 4 stamp that bypassed every flag. Their solution was this machine, a massive net cast over everyone. It would scan every true pool at once, leaving no stone unturned. The ghost figure they had been chasing would finally print on a screen with a name. Speaking with blunt urgency, she made it clear that this was a trap. This massive trap was built specifically to find the very power he was hiding. There was no way for the porter, freelancer, and 4 to escape unrecognized. The scanner read only absolute truth, and his fake rank would instantly shatter before it. But skipping the test was no escape either, leading to the same ultimate doom. He had to solve this impossible problem the only way he knew how. His plan was simple: force the testing machine to read his power as low as humanly possible. He explained this to her in the dim back room, pure honesty. This hidden corner was the only spot in the entire kingdom, beyond the system's watchful gaze. Since his escape, he had spent every moment mastering his throttle, training tirelessly. He learned exactly how little power to release, making a lethal strike look totally average. Suppressing his massive energy so tightly was a skill even she struggled to notice. This suppression technique was his sole weapon against a machine that measured raw truth. His strategy was to show up at the evaluation center disguised as a low-level registry clerk. He could not use his mercenary or porter identities; those faces were far too recognizable. On paper, he was just rank 4, a meaningless name lost in the massive system database. He intended to choke his power pool down with everything he had, hiding his true strength. Appearing as a genuine Tier 4 was crucial, the lowest of the low. Just a drop of power in an unremarkable fodder pool, something the scanner would barely notice. The inspectors would log him and wave him through with the rest of the faceless crowd. He would leave as a verified rank 4, carrying the most unremarkable number in existence. When the government auditor searched the database, he would find absolutely nothing worth investigating. That was his only plan, and he told her flatly, but can he actually pull this off? But she did not offer any reassurance at all, staring back with cold, heavy, silent doubt. Instead, she warned him that his suppression technique would never be enough to fool it. She understood the terrifying truth about the machine, a fatal detail he had foolishly underestimated. The throttle only masks output, she explained, hiding the heat of an active attack. It can make someone wielding godlike energy look like an ordinary warrior simply exerting himself. That trick works perfectly on a standard combat log because battle sensors only record active, spent force. But this device was completely different. It did not care about active spells. It measured what he was. The sensor reached deep into his internal energy pool itself. The scanner would evaluate total volume of power, not just the tiny fraction released. Squeezing down the energy he released would do absolutely nothing to hide his massive reservoir. The scanner would dive past his defenses and weigh his entire existence on its scale. She had analyzed elite power levels her whole career, and she had tested him multiple times. Knowing the difference between concealing a single spellcast and hiding core identity was second nature. The tester would ask the ultimate question, and that test had no safety bypass. He could restrain his output, but he could never shrink the vast ocean within him. That pool was his core self, and the scanner was not measuring a performance. It was measuring his soul, and a power level that shattered the limits of the gauge. No amount of willpower at the entry door could force that number smaller. He sat in the quiet room processing this, facing a mathematical nightmare he could not calculate away. It was a worst-case scenario, the single extreme risk that no planner could ever budget for. There was only one option remaining: suppress his power harder than he ever had before. He would throw every ounce of focus into holding back the beast inside him. Marching toward the evaluation station, he aimed to squeeze godlike force into rank 4. Yet deep down, he knew the scanner was designed specifically to expose this exact lie. For 3 long days, the citizens filed through the testing center, and he waited his turn. He joined the massive queue on the final day, seeking safety in sheer numbers. One low-level commoner among 10,000 others, watching the scanner log the quiet masses. People were stamped and quickly ushered along. Then, he stood before the towering obsidian obelisk. A dark metal testing column stands tall in the center of the guild hall. Each survivor places a hand on the reading plate, beneath a long vertical screen. This is where their power levels climb and settle. A clerk sits at a podium, logging every score against their registered stamp. He watches an E-rank place their hand, the display climbing to 140. The clerk waves them through, calling up a D-rank who holds a relic. The display climbs past 1,000 to 1,200, settling without any surprise. The clerk logs it without a second glance. The static masses read static. A frozen population lays their hands on the plate, receiving the same old scores. Their rankings were frozen by the decree. The board line moves slowly forward. Every rising number tells the exact same story this realm has repeated. No one rises, ranks are fixed, the future is locked in place. This measuring device is a mere formality for an unchanging population. He lets the absolute certainty of those settling numbers wash over him. He slouches to blend in because a man trying to hide in a crowd wants everyone to remain completely bored, and they are until his turn. From the moment he woke, he suppressed his power harder than ever. His entire will is bent on forcing his massive energy pool down. He needs a simple score of 4, the most boring number here. He walks up to the plate, appearing as a weak F-rank survivor. A digital 4 hovers above his head for the clerk to see. He places his hand on the plate, pouring everything into acting weak. He tries to be nothing, to look like the dead weight they expect. But the measuring device cuts past his control, digging deep into his reservoir. It does not ask how much energy he wants to use, it weighs his entire being. The display catches his presence and immediately starts to climb upwards. It shoots past 4 before his hand even settles, making the clerk look up. The clerk stares from his podium at this impossible error as it passes 100. His desperate attempt to suppress his power fails completely because his container is too massive. You cannot hide an ocean in a cup, and the machine measures everything. By the time it hits 1,000, the shocked clerk stands up. The numbers rocket past 10,000, then past 100,000. Digits flash up the column faster than the eye can follow. A stunned silence spreads through the board line. Nobody is yawning now. The score refuses to stop, screaming past 1 million and climbing higher. It blasts past 10 million, shattering the highest record of the entire realm. And it does not slow down because his true power has no limit. His energy pool runs completely off the scale of any measuring instrument. The machine has been pointed at a force it was never built to contain. Its screen completely fills up, and the digits run out of room. There is nowhere left for the numbers to climb, yet they keep rising. The machine stalls, its entire display glowing bright as the force presses onward. With absolutely nowhere left to go, the entire system suddenly suffers a fault. The testing machine throws an error that no operator has ever witnessed. The screen goes pitch black, showing only a flat error. The clerk reads it aloud. Before anyone could stop it, the instrument failed, completely failed. Numbers simply exceeded the machine's capacity. His true power was immeasurable. An uncountable reading suddenly flashed from the man originally stamped with a 4. The entire hall fell dead silent around the broken reckoner, leaving everyone frozen. A stunned clerk stared at the 4 floating over the hunter's head. The system simply could not hold the sheer scale of the energy behind him. In that one cold instant, his mind raced through every possible worst-case scenario. Every survival plan he calculated since day one collapsed into this single nightmare. The massive gap between his real power and that public rank was now fully exposed. He had spent 5 grueling days building a perfect mask to keep his level hidden. Yet the highly specialized machine, designed by the auditors, still found him out anyway. There was no way to spin this, no shadow left to hide in. He could not bury the truth under excuses anymore because he was fully exposed. And honestly, nobody in that entire room was ready for what happened next. The frozen system did the impossible, unleashing an ancient authority on him. It had locked 8 billion ranks in place without a single change since day one. Only 10 legendary hunters stood at the absolute top of this rigid, unchanging world. But the system took the uncountable reading from the broken reckoner and acted. It promoted him. A massive, glowing holographic panel opened right above his head. The low rank of 4 that stood there for 5 days began to redraw itself. For the first time in history, the public board overwrote its own frozen data. It branded him with an S, not a high E, not sudden A, absolute S. This was the peak of the ladder, a rank only 10 others had ever held. No 11th person had ever joined them, until this exact history-making moment. In its cold, mechanical voice, the system declared that the survivor I am Saj is reassigned to rank S, making him the 11th S rank in the realm. The top ranks had been locked at 10, no stamp ever moved. But now the system catapulted the lowest ranked hunter to the peak. Everyone in the entire hall stared in silence, reading the impossible transformation together. In that single, breathtaking moment, his 3 secret identities finally fused into one. The weak porter stamped 4, whom the starting parties always laughed at. A handsome, mysterious solo freelancer who took all the high-tier loot. This shadow cleared high-tier dungeons alone, taking every piece of spoils. And the legendary Phantom, Carrie, the major guilds whispered about in secret. A mere porter who guided 4 teams out of deadly vaults unharmed. He did all that only to be paid in pathetic scraps of copper. For 5 days, these 3 legends were kept strictly apart in people's minds. But the broken reckoner shattered that mystery, revealing them as one single man. Standing there, his uncountable rating lit up, printing the 11th S rank. The actual number remained hidden in the shadows, completely unprintable. It stayed a secret, just like it had always been. Not even the system itself could ever write down his truly unfathomable power. Yet the undeniable truth of his rise now glowed above him for all to see. The very crowd that once mocked him fell silent, never to laugh again. This sudden exposure ruined his peaceful life, but it unlocked his final skill. It came when he grew into the need for it, the only answer to a true reading. A pool reading that rang true. His panel named it Hollow Vault and revealed what it was. A hidden reserve folded away from the main pool, held where no instrument or auditor could ever reach. It was a portion of himself that the Reckoner could never have read. Even if it had not faulted, it sat entirely outside the figure the machine searched for. Hidden in a fold that the realm had no scale or plate to weigh. That broken instrument had read everything he was, but Hollow Vault changed everything from this instant. Now there was a part of him the next instrument would never be able to read. A true magnitude kept secret, even as the truth of his rising blazed over his head. A reserve no tithe could cancel because no auditor could ever find it. He felt it. Fold away deep inside him under the silent stare of the hall, untouchable by the realm. The system had exposed him to the world, and yet hid him in the very same breath. Just like it had advised him to conceal his power on that first morning. Instead of correcting what it had built, that faulted reading did not stay here. He felt it leave, the way one feels the system working beyond their sight. Even when it happens somewhere his own eyes can never follow. That uncountable figure lifted off the dark display, printing itself to a secret board. A private ledger kept by the system, completely hidden from the survivors in the hall. At the podium, the clerk felt it too, glancing down as the entry wrote itself. Writing itself directly past his hand, Churyong stood at the edge of the crowd. She had entered an hour before Imaj, staying perfectly still in her own quiet way. The exact stillness that took over whenever she saw something others could not. Her eyes met his across the silent crowd, delivering a warning without a single word. The reading had gone somewhere far worse than this crowded hall. It printed directly to a ledger the criers never spoke of, a secret auditor's board. Built for anomalies flagged by the ceiling that they could never locate. The system wrote the warden's index, and right beside the 11th S stamp, it appeared. Beside the name Imaj, it stamped the single word the Reckoner had faulted on. Uncountable, a dangerous man read it now. Imaj did not see his face and did not need to. He felt the entry settle into a hand that had been waiting weeks for this moment. The chief of the cap auditors, a shadow the broker had only dared name once. Baek Gangto, the feared man who never fought an account, but simply erased it. He had felt the ceiling flag a climber for weeks without ever finding him. But now the broken Reckoner had handed him the prey on a silver platter. That single word uncountable sat on the warden's index next to an F rank. A stamp that was no longer F rank and somewhere deep within an office. The man built to erase exactly what Imaj was, Baek Gangto, read the file. Receiving the target the ceiling could never catch, he immediately marked the file. He claimed it off the index as his own, marking it with an auditor's seal. Setting his target, the chief of the cap auditors had set his name against Imaj. The 11th S and that terrifying, uncountable figure standing right between them. Across the hall, Churyang's still face confirmed the cold dread settling in his chest. The easy path was over. The porter, the freelancer, the 41 man was exposed. The one monster the tithing system was built to destroy had just been identified. His name was now written in the hunter's hand, but the silence would not last. A silent hall full of people who just watched the impossible is a room about to explode with noise, and that noise crashed down on him from every single direction. Before he even pulled his hand off the dead plate, up at the podium the clerk was, still muttering the system error out loud to himself, when the first guild crier bolted for the doors. He understood from the back of his mind what he was running to sell, the only piece of fresh news this world had carried since day one. A stamp had moved, the closed apex now held an 11th and the 4. Everyone in the lower ranks used to laugh at now, had an S shining over his head, with a word beside it that no machine could ever write, the first to run sells. For the highest price, by the time he reached the doors of the hall, walking with careful steps of someone with nowhere to run, the entire crowd already knew, and they had all turned to stare at him like they never had when he was just dead weight, he calculated. His next move the way he priced everything, standing right in the open with his old cover completely burned away, and the math was the absolute worst he had dealt with in a very long time. For 5 days, his entire survival had rested on one simple fact: nobody looked at his number because the man wearing it was stamped as rank 4, but the system just took that safety and burned it in front of the entire world. Now everyone stared. The pathetic joke who could be laughed off and paid in cheap scraps was gone, and in his place stood the sole survivor in the history of the system to rise in rank, the 11th S-class, the uncountable anomaly, and every single faction in this world wanted a piece of him. He had spent every single resource trying to stay completely unseen. And being noticed was the one outcome he had never planned for, because exposure was supposed to mean death, and believe me, they descended on him like starving wolves. The guilds arrived first, because a faction lives or dies on the strength it can. Field and an unranked S-class is the most valuable free agent alive. Within our recruiters hovered at his elbow with contracts already written, offering him captaincy he never even asked for, a secure seat, and premium safe zone territory terms. That would make his old abusive captain choke. He closely read their eager faces, just like he used to read the greedy captains in those flooded vaults, under the flattery. He saw the exact same cold truth. They did not actually care about the man. They wanted his numbers, the unstoppable weapon they could point directly at a rival faction's wall. To every single recruiter, he gave the calm, firm rejection of someone who knows how to decline without causing offense, stating he took no contracts and bowed to no leader, and he watched their fake smiles curdle into calculations on how to corner an S-class who refused to submit might be cornered instead. Then the top 10 turned toward him, and he felt it. Long before seeing any physical proof, just like feeling the air drain from the entire room. They had been 10 since the very first day, a locked group nailed in place. The absolute rule that everyone accepted without question, but now the system had forced an 11th seat onto the very top of their ladder without even asking them. He did not need to read their faces to understand what that meant to 10 people whose entire status depended on keeping that door shut. An 11th S-class threatened the exact thing that made the 10 who they were, whether they wanted to recruit him, test him, or quietly make sure his seat was emptied before the world grew accustomed to it. He still could not tell, but he recognized that focus, a cold, dangerous, calculating gaze. The crushing pressure from the top of the ladder had never once cared about those at the bottom. He knew that anyone noticed by the high ranks was just one mistake away from becoming their next target. A problem erased, beneath it all, quieter than the guilds and colder than the 10. The auditors turned their eyes toward him. They were the only ones in the system who wanted absolutely nothing, while guilds wanted to recruit. And the 10 wanted their top fighter back. The auditors desired nothing. They only enforced the law. And the law they enforced was the exact crime now glowing brightly right over his head. Growing past your assigned rank is strictly forbidden by the system decree, yet his rank stamp had jumped from the very bottom to the absolute top in a single massive glitch, and Behind that new S stamp was a power level the system could not even calculate, the largest rank violation the world had ever seen. He had once read the strict laws from a town crier, knowing the exact deadly risks from the very first morning, and now the danger arrived. The chief of the capital auditors now held his name in his own hands, leaving only one final question on the ledger: when would they strike? He found Cherong. She stood at the edge of the slowly dispersing crowd, having passed through an hour before him just to stay and watch the chaos. She did not give him her usual emotionless appraiser expression this time. That cold mask was meant for the gates, and those gates were far behind them now. Instead, she scanned him from top to bottom, just like she had in the market square. And at every gate since, whatever she saw in his ruined disguise and glowing stamp, she quickly hid away. Then she did the one thing that defined their partnership. No comfort here, just a brutal warning about the massive danger he was in. Speaking like a professional appraiser spotting a deadly hazard, she warned that the recruiters and the watchers of the 10 were just minor noise, too slow to kill him in time. But the one dangerous force that actually moved fast had already set its sights on him. He was told not to sleep 2 consecutive nights in the same safe zone, because the high official who flagged his file does not send recruiters, he sends a sweep. And that sweep never announces itself. Together, they quietly walked out of the safe zone, making sure the system scanners did not link them, a skill she mastered far better than him. Under the shelter of a stone ridge, away from the criers, he made a final, desperate decision. Forced by his ruined disguise, speaking to her plainly since the ridge was completely empty. The patrol guards could not reach them here. His days of hiding were officially over. He told her no going back. You cannot hide a glowing rank stamp that the entire world had already witnessed, so he would stop hiding the wrong thing. Let them all know he was powerful, since his immense strength was now lit for everyone to see. Nothing could ever cover it up again. Let them chase his visible power all they wanted. Because his true crime was the reason behind it, his impossible, unmeasurable power level, which had glitched the system calculator, was a reality the world now knew existed. But the actual mind-boggling scale of it, with endless digits the status screen refused to show, remained completely hidden on the broken display, deep within a dark, locked vault that the system had sealed away from public view. What he truly was, a living engine, which no normal path could ever create, and trained to hide, remained his secret alone. He would guard that secret far more fiercely than anything before. He would display his power, but bury the source deep, where no system scan could ever drag it to light. She listened to everything, then met his resolve with the only question that truly mattered. That was where a man went to find answers, especially when every recruiter in the realm wanted his strength, and the one enemy who could end him already held his file. He had been chewing on that same question since the room before the reckoner, and the ridge was where he finally spoke the answer out loud. The reason was an auditor's secret, he told her, that strange wrongness he carried since the very first morning. A system protecting the exact anomaly it should have erased had a deeper purpose, and that purpose was theirs alone. No crier sold it, no guild knew, and no dungeon cashed it, because the truth sat with the only faction in the realm that understood what the ceiling was actually built for. The auditors knew, so did the man who had marked his file, but if the truth lived anywhere, he could reach it without walking straight into the chief auditor's own trap. It lived in the ground the auditors had already worked and abandoned, the audited deadlands. What the criers called the quiet march, that was where the cap auditors did their earliest work, where the broker once told him in a quiet whisper that an old auditor vault still stood over a stretch of land they had emptied of everything capable of climbing. She did not call him reckless because she had stopped calling his choices reckless back in the flooded vaults, and instead did the one thing that made their partnership worth the risk. To her, she made his wild plans survivable. The quiet march was watched. She warned him just like all old auditor ground, but it was guarded lightly by stationary watchers left behind on dead lands, rather than the active hunt squads sent after a marked target, and stationary eyes she could read. Her unique talent that saw a path through any seal spotted an auditor's watcher, just like she spotted a hidden trap on ground guarded only by stationary eyes. She was his ultimate secret weapon, an appraiser who could read the watchers before they spotted them. Was the difference between survival and a swift death. She would read the march for him, just as she had read the guard on every restricted list, and he would cross under her perfect guidance between Her vision and his magic pool, they would reach that vault or die trying without ever getting caught. It was the same silent partnership they struck back in the flooded vaults, scaled up to the only ground holding answers. Talk about a high-stakes gamble. And no loud promises, because any declaration was something the watch could hear. So they set out for the quiet march before the next bell, the two of them, the 11th S rank who made every faction in the realm turn their heads, and the top praiser who had lied to 4 major guilds to keep him hidden. They walked away from the safe zones and headed straight toward the audited deadlands, where the auditors buried whatever harvest does not want found. Over his head, the new stamp printed an S, where 4 had printed for 5 days, lit for the whole realm to read, and behind it, hidden where no plate could measure, his true power levels kept squaring quietly. Through the night, just like it had since the first morning, he shouldered nothing this time because his porter was burned with the rest of his cover, and there were no bags left to carry. Leaving the safe zone, he walked as he was, strong in the open, heading toward the only faction with the real answers, seeking the one spot where he could extract it without putting his name back into the chief auditor's hand. The quiet march began right where the safe zones ended. He felt the line in the gray plain before seeing it. The world changed completely. Behind them, the ground hummed with low mana, but ahead, absolute silence. It was like a million static pools breathing at once, constant energy. Then nothing, just a flat, empty space where absolutely nothing lived. Churyong stopped. She read the dead air like a roster at a gate. She scanned the void, speaking in her usual clipped tone reserved for hazards. And get this, she warned him that this deadness was the entire point. The auditors had completely cleared it out, leaving absolutely nothing behind. They had nulled every single pool of energy to zero, leaving the land cold. Something lay buried. They were officially crossing audited ground now. This was land the tithe had already stripped completely clean, she told him. The terrifying threat here was not what lived on the ground, but what watched. She stepped a half pace ahead, scanning for the watchers before they spotted them. She guided them. He had only spent 5 days learning basic dungeon reading. He could read a dungeon sigil, but he had no way of spotting an auditor's watcher. Those hidden devices sat completely outside the energy pools, reading inward. Only a rare talent like hers could read them back. He followed blindly. He walked blind, trusting her completely for the first time since morning. It felt entirely foreign to him. Meanwhile, she kept scanning, catching the first watcher. He did not sense a thing, but she spotted a standing eye on a rise. It sat silently on the dead stone. She described the threat in a whisper. A planted reader holding still, ready to wake if any trace of energy passed. The moment any energy crossed its line, it would alert the auditors. She steered them away. They walked in a wide arc through the dead flats. He felt absolutely nothing. There was only the cold numbness of the soil. Behind them, the watcher remained asleep. Her quick eyes had countered it before the device could detect their presence. This tense trek was teaching him the true, grim shape of their world. Deep, unnatural wrongness settled in his chest the further they walked. A true ruin is something that fell, but this silent space had not fallen. It was a space deliberately emptied of life and kept that way by force. Too even, too perfect, the quiet felt deeply artificial. This entire stretch had the eerie stillness of an engineered graveyard. They passed old stone foundations, the remains of some ancient, forgotten fortress. The rock was scrubbed so clean of energy that even Churyong sensed nothing. Beyond the stone ruins lay a massive, flat field of strange markers stretching out. They were lined up in perfect rows. Churyong stopped, suddenly turning completely silent now. It was the look she got when her readings went deeper than words. Those markers are tithe marks, she finally told him in a flat, quiet voice. No graves, each marker stood where a pool of life was destroyed. It was a physical ledger of their theft, carved directly into the very dirt. This terrifying record of stolen power stretched out further than they could see. He had always assumed the tithe was just a gradual, small-scale collection of energy. But this field proved otherwise. As they neared the vault, the watchers multiplied. Just like security tightening near a vault, they were approaching the final stretch. This final crossing was the part that almost cost them their lives. They spotted 2 standing watcher eyes, positioned to cover each other's blind spots. Slipping past one would only walk them directly into the path of the other. It was a ruthless trap, designed to punish anyone trying an obvious, easy dodge. No wide angle was safe, so she used the same trick from before. She caught the half-beat, reading the slow, turning gaze of the second watcher. A standing eye is fixed, but it is certainly not blind to movement. As she timed the gap between their sweeps, she got them moving quickly. He had to stay fast and low to cross that dead, flat space ahead. Just look at this tension. Even a single mistake would alert the entire vault. Suddenly, he felt the watcher's cold, heavy gaze pass right behind them. It felt like a dragging weight, scanning the empty spot they just left. Then they were past it, safely sliding into the shadows under the vault's massive stone wall. With the danger behind them, the appraiser finally let out a tiny breath. Somehow, they successfully crossed the deadlands right under their noses. Not a single watcher woke, because she read what he crossed blindly. And there it stood, exactly where the broker said it would. A massive squat block of ancient auditor stone, sitting alone in the dead flats. There was no visible gate, and his eyes could detect absolutely no magical sigil on it. That blank stone was his first warning that magic wouldn't help here. Until now, every single dungeon had answered to raw mana. Usually there was a sigil or a mechanism a strong mana pool could easily force open. Or a warden they could easily crush, but this was auditor ground. The auditors specialized in nullifying mana, making any raw power completely useless against them. Their vaults were built by the one faction who laughed at magic. He placed his hand on the freezing stone, searching for any seam. He reached out like he had 1,000 times before, but nothing. Any magical energy he channeled into the lock was immediately neutralized to zero. Even dumping his entire, massive pool of mana would change absolutely nothing. The lock would just absorb the energy, holding fast against his power. So he stopped pushing with magic and started thinking like an auditor. He relied on his analytical mind from 11 years of pricing risks. And here is the twist: the key lay in the lock's design flaw. A lock built to drain magic is a lock that expects magic. It was built by men so obsessed with magic, they ignored everything else. Chirian placed her hand beside his on the stone to read it. Using her talent, she whispered what she detected inside the lock's mechanisms. It was a massive nullification field designed to strangle and drain any magical energy it touched. But because it targeted magic, it was completely blind to physical force. Plain stone was ignored, iron meant nothing, physical pressure was invisible. The patient pressure of a simple wedge and lever would easily succeed. Ordinary mechanical labor from a magicless person could break this solid rock. The creators had never imagined anyone would use basic physics against them. They built a perfect defense against magic, but left it blind to leverage. Since leverage would work, he prepared to open it with physical force. Using his system conversion function, he carefully bought the exact tools needed. Converting assets drains the pool, and any active trace of magic near an auditor gets flagged. The lock itself is a constant threat, capable of detecting any power spent nearby. Out in the dead flats, Chiriang confirmed no watchers were lurking. He converted a set of simple hardened wedges and a long iron pry bar, no magical weapons or constructs. Any tracking system would register them as worthless scrap, the dullest tools imaginable. He carried them toward the lock completely cold, letting no magical aura leak ahead of him. Then he worked the seam they never thought to guard, placing wedges into the cracks. Right where the auditor's stone met its heavy frame, hammering them with the pry bar. The force driving those wedges deep was nothing but the plain leverage of his own weight. It was purely mechanical and entirely monoblind. There was nothing for the nulling field. To detect, the lock just sat there waiting to drain power that never actually arrived. While the crack it could not read widened under his steady physical strokes. Finally, the worked stone gave way with a harsh grind of rock, exposing the open vault. He had cracked it using simple leverage, can you believe that, bypassing a lock built to strangle magic. That had never learned how to guard against a wedge. Suddenly, his system panel flashed. It responded to his needs, but this unlock felt colder and far more important. It was the first real solution he had ever found against an enemy magic couldn't touch. The system labeled this new function anti-audit, detailing its purpose in flat, clinical terms. It explained what the skill did, using the same cold terms it used for everything. He could convert his entire hoard, the laundered gold, and all registered assets, into completely non-magical countermeasures like physical leverage and basic tools. These physical items carried absolutely no mana, making them invisible to the hostile nulling field. This was the only force that could actually affect an auditor. It was foundational groundwork. A single starting stone, not a finished wall, yet he understood its true value. The ties completely neutralized mana, and up until now, every weapon he owned relied on it. Against the man who held his records, he had essentially been a god with empty hands. Talk about a helpless feeling. This anti-audit function was the very first tool he possessed that the tithe couldn't drain. A simple wedge had taught him the principle, the system had codified it, and now he stood in that cold vault knowing a crucial truth. The next time the chief of the auditors reached out to nullify his mana pool, he would not need to defend his magic pool, he would protect it with a force that the creators of the nulling field were far too arrogant to ever imagine. The dull mechanical leverage of an object carrying 0 mana for them to drain. Stepping inside, he found a massive record ledger where a gold treasury should have stood. It was clear proof that these auditors guarded a different kind of wealth than the guilds. The chamber contained no cores, no powerful relics, and absolutely no gold for brokers to sell. Instead, there was only a stone holding a massive ledger right at its center. A tall reading board made of dark metal stood nearby, positioned in front of a scored wall. The surface was carved from top to bottom with the auditor's own mysterious calculations. He had bypassed a high-security vault expecting treasure, only to find a written record instead. But a record kept by the faction that erased risers was worth more than any gold. It held the ultimate truth, written by the only hands who knew the grand design. He could finally read it without walking directly into the chief auditor's trap. Churyang stepped up to the standing ledger and activated her scanning technique on the detailed pages. While he approached the scored wall, letting his sharp habits guide his sharp eyes. He approached the scored wall, combining her talent with his sharp habits. The skill of reading the fine print no one else bothers with, they took the chamber. Part line by line, the first secret the ledger revealed completely shattered the story. The whole realm was told on the first morning, wiped out in a single cold line in the auditor records. Their entire allotment had a working name, and this name was Harvest, the flat broadcast that doubled 8 billion pools of power and named them survivors of a culling realm, had called itself a mere survival, a chance handed to a doomed population to live by climbing, but the ledger called it Harvest instead. They had been gathered into a realm built to fatten them and take them. The massive doubling on the first morning of seeding, 8 billion pools bred up. Single notch just so there would be more to take, the entire apparatus of ranks. Dungeons, the ceiling, and the tithe was simply the machinery of a place that wanted them. Grown and then gathered, he had viewed the tithe as a mere enforcement and the ceiling as a cage, but the ledger named them for what they truly were, the tools of a harvest. The doubling was the bait, the ledger said, as Chirian read him the inner workings off the board, while he read the proof etched into the scored wall, and the two readings closed on the same cold shape, a pool left to grow on. Its own is a pool that grows unevenly, with some climbing fast and others not at all. And a harvest hates uneven. They demand a predictable yield, one they can count on. So the decree doubled every pool once on the first morning to set a clean seeded floor under the whole population. 8 billion pools bred up a single even notch, and then it froze them there. The freeze was a calculation dressed as a law of the realm. A frozen population is a population that grows only where the harvest allows it. In the dungeons and the runs, the system meters everything out. Every pool's increase passes through ground the auditors watch and log, ensuring nothing fattens off the books and nothing climbs out of reach. The static masses he had watched file through the reckoner, the double population frozen on the first morning, were just a crop the decree was growing on purpose, exactly as fast as a harvester wants its crop to grow, slowly, evenly and strictly under their eye. Then the ledger revealed what the decree's ceiling was actually for, and it was not what the crier had sold him at the rim. Talk about a total reality check. That revelation hit his chest hard because his survival was built on the crier's smaller truth. The crier claimed the ceiling flagged growth past their stamp because the realm corrected whatever climbed out of its assigned box, and enforcement, a cage that kept the ladder fixed. But according to the ledger, the cage was another calculated method. A ceiling that capped each person was not there to keep the ladder fixed for its own sake. It was to keep any single pool from ever growing large enough to matter, because a harvest fears one thing above all else: a yield that grows larger than the harvester itself. So they cap every pool low and even, and they have a crop they can harvest at leisure. 8 billion small pools, not one of which is worth fearing. Let one pool climb without a cap, and they have grown the one thing a harvest cannot afford: a pool massive enough to become a weapon instead of a yield. So the ceiling flagged every Climber the very second their pool reached a size the harvest could not safely manage, then the auditors would come, carrying out their cold work like inventory control. Out on the march, the endless field of time marks stood as the cold cull record of a crop. A graveyard of criminals, every pool that grew too large was instantly reset to zero, shrinking down to nothing before it could ever become a threat the harvesters would actually fear. And then the ledger revealed exactly where that tithe went. It turned the cold dread in his chest into something completely solid. He had always thought the tithe was an eraser, ending a man's life entirely. A target simply wiped off the board, their name fading away on the ledger. But the auditor's plain records revealed a far more sinister truth instead. Poured, not deleted, the tithe stripped away a riser's power, harvesting that power completely, drawing the entire pool out of the world, and funneled that stolen mana straight down, dragging it out of the realm. The ledger called this destination the undercount, was rooted straight through those marks, down into the dark beneath their world. He realized this massive network spanned across their entire world, out on the dead flats. Those dead flats were where risers were drained. They didn't simply end there. Even those elite climbers, who suddenly spiked in power, watched vanishing within hours, leaving an endless field of marks stretching past sight. Every single bit of that harvested power was funneled straight into a massive reservoir below. Fed by unseen, careful hands, Cher Young found the exact line that detailed the rest, reading it aloud from the massive ledger in a quiet, flat voice that betrayed just how deeply shaken she was by these facts. The auditor's plain notes didn't name what this undercount actually fed. Instead, the book described a massive hunger that took and never gave, kept dormant by constant feeding. This entire elaborate system, the artificial limits and the freezing of level caps and the tithe as a system built to keep that hunger asleep, a harvest feeding a sleeping beast kept its crop. She read because the sleeping horror below would only awaken if it sensed a massive surge of power. A tiny, even crop would never disturb it. Therefore, the hard ceiling was enforced to keep absolute control over their power, ensuring that an excessively massive pool of mana could never exist in the realm. A power that massive was the one trigger that would wake the sleeping beast. Think about that. The hard ceiling wasn't a defensive wall, it was a lid. It sealed away a nightmare sleeping below, kept heavily weighted down by constant culling. Cher Young paused, visibly struggling to process the heavy weight of what came next. And she read the last line aloud. It was about a secret valve. The system named exactly one exception to this even, capped crop. A single, uncapped pool designed to grow infinitely. Its purpose was chillingly clear. In the cold logic of the overseers, any system holding back such pressure needs a release valve. A lid alone cannot contain a force that grows forever. The beast below would keep growing, and a simple lid could never hold it forever. So where was this secret, uncapped valve, built right under their noses? A single release valve allowed to bypass every restriction. They needed a massive pool, capable of either fully overfeeding the monster below to force a deeper slumber, to overfeed the sleeping beast or starve it out. One uncapped pool, built on purpose within the frozen population they worked so hard to keep small. Cher Young finished the line and stopped reading. She looked at him across the null chamber, and she did not have to say the rest, because he had already admitted it to himself. He was the single uncapped pool, squaring that no harvest should have allowed, creating an engine off the charts of any instrument, the anomaly the system had coached him to hide on that first morning. Instead of correcting it, a machine meant to erase risers had actually built the largest riser it would ever produce, coaching him to hide, and he had carried the unsettling wrongness of that since that first morning, having no shape for it. And now the ledger in this vault had placed the shape right before him. The system had protected its own valve. Mercy never entered the calculations here. Somewhere in the formula that doubled 8 billion people, freezing and capping them, and summoning them to keep a hunger asleep, a hand had built one pool to grow. Uncapped against the day the lid would fail, that creator had hidden the pool behind the smallest seal in the allotment, ensuring the harvest's own enforcers would never trigger the one yield they could not afford to cancel. For 5 days he believed he was a crime they wanted erased, but the truth was far wilder. The other way, that he was a tool the harvest built and lost track of the release valve on a terrifying hunger he was not yet allowed to see. Holding his file in his hand, the chief of the cap auditors was a man whose entire faction existed to keep the lid weighted down, hunting the single pool built to lift it. he did not dare to reach past that point, because chasing partial answers is how a man tricks himself into a false comfort he cannot afford, and the ledger did not reveal the rest. It named the under account, and it named the hunger fed below, naming him as the valve built to either glut or starve it, and there it stopped just as the auditors halted their calculations, where even their own bookkeeping went silent. What slept beneath the world, what the harvest fed, what a valve like him was created to fight, the chamber did not say, and he stood in the cold with only the floor of a partial answer beneath him, the rest fading to dark below as the true numbers remained hidden on the faulted display. Harvest went somewhere, a place where a hunger was real, fed and kept asleep under a heavy lid. The auditors waited in the cold, and he was the pool built to lift that lid. Cherry Young folded the standing ledgers, the tension finally fading from her face. She told him, her voice clipped like an appraiser cataloging a lethal hazard, that they had what they came for, and that they should not be in this vault. When the standing eyes turned their gaze inward, she was right, and they left the chamber. But he carried the wine out into the dead flats, and it sat freezing in his chest, no longer shapeless wrongness. He was the valve. The harvest fed something dark below, and the system that summoned every other riser to feed it had built him in secret to be the single pool that could starve it. He had a refuge for his secrets, because someone who priced tail risk for 11 years does not wait for disaster to strike before securing a shelter somewhere in those middle days of the carry. While the broker was still converting his flooded vault cores into pure gold, he had spent a quiet share of his hoard on land, a sanctuary in the broken country, past the last safe zone where the watchful guards ran thin and the ceiling's banners ran thinner. He had converted that gold into worked stone, and the standing walls and listed boards did not care who held them. The place rose because he had prepared everything for 11 long years against a dark, unwanted outcome. He never named it out loud, though in his own head he called it Tally Hold, a sanctuary where the world's absolute final tally could stand, undetected by any. This instrument remained an empty insurance policy until the Great Reckoner finally faulted. Once the Great Reckoner finally failed, and his cover burned on that quiet, grim march behind him, this hold became the only ground in the entire allotment he truly owned. He fled directly there, a man designated as the harvest's release valve. Desperately needs strong walls that the harvest did not build. It did not stay empty long. Soon, those filling the space revealed more about the harvest than any ledger could. The Reckoner had scanned the entire population over 3 whole days, letting the static masses pass right through, but those static masses were not the only ones. Was scanned here and there across the allotment. It caught the gaps. It found those small, honest discrepancies, like Category E grinding past its stamp and failing, or Category D pulling a relic, wherever those tiny gaps ran too wide. It flagged them. That flag was a death sentence. They were the risers. That was the realm's term for a crop growing too large, and now everything changed. The cull turned its bell toward them, just as it had toward him. The harvest does not care about the difference between built valves and accidental. Any pool that grows a notch too deep is one the lid must crush. And so the auditors hunted the flagged, just like everything else below the. Running away was truly the only option left for someone whose growth became their crime. They fled the safe zones, heading straight into the unforgiving country. They fled into the broken country like hunted beasts fleeing for their lives, and really, who can blame them? But that broken country was exactly where he had built his strong walls. They found Tally Hold in 1s and 2s, then in a steady current. These running souls had committed no crime except growing too large. They arrived. Because a sanctuary for the hunted gets whispered about faster than any official crier could spread it. Ultimately, he refused to turn any of them away, and his actual reasons were entirely practical. Any noble, poetic excuse would have been a lie easily read on his. Pity was not the simple thing that moved him, though he felt it. The grim tithe marks on the march had already shown him the dark. Shelter was his chosen path because the lone uncapped pool in a restricted realm desperately needs the single thing the entire harvest forbids, which is other growing pools thriving. A sanctuary packed with unreadable risers meant harboring the only allies this valve would ever have. Look closely here. It is brilliant, cold logic. The numbers worked out beautifully, cold and perfectly clean beneath the hot, emotional surface of each situation. Every target the auditors pursued was a pool the harvest wanted. Once completely drained, that targeted pool had every single reason in the world to support the one man designed to starve their oppressor. He welcomed them all. He welcomed them in because the brutal arithmetic demanded it. Both math and mercy pointed him in the exact same direction, so he did not bother trying to separate them. To house his new allies, he built with the same absolute, unmatched stealth. He had practiced since day one, hiding his growing pool behind shapes the system could never trace back to him. The walls rose higher. He warded the base with runes, hiding it from the auditor's scanning eyes. He knew from his grueling march that auditors always ignored simple dead stone, leaving it untouched. He housed and fed these runaway risers from a treasury that never ran dry. A balanced pool never empties. He quietly converted their needs. This converted their resources into durable, standard assets listed by front brokers as ordinary trade. This kept his modest ledger nameless and of no particular size on every board. He put the rescued risers to work around the compound, fully aware that a sheltered crowd with nothing to do always ends up turning on itself. Running the base with the hands of the refugees themselves kept it from looking like a secret kingdom. He absolutely refused to call it a kingdom and never let them refer to him as their lord. It was simply a hold, and he kept the true figures completely dark. He kept his true numbers masked behind those lit symbols, keeping everything in the dark. The risers sheltering under his walls knew him only as the 11th sigil. None of them realized that the wealth behind his stamp was practically limitless. Few knew the valve was open, keeping the lid completely safe and unsuspecting. His secret held steady for a long time, maintaining a well-priced reserve. He would not pretend he didn't enjoy building something far larger than a shelter. He could feel a massive community starting to form right around his compound walls. A base of hidden refugees growing free, untouched by the harvest, was a seed. His inner calculator priced that tiny seed as the start of the one thing forbidden. This was the one thing the realm forbade, a hidden pool of absolute power. A power they could never find. He kept those thoughts quiet, watching the arrivals. He watched the steady stream of risers pouring through his secure gates. They worked tirelessly on the walls, and he realized he wasn't hiding alone anymore. No longer just him and his appraiser, without realizing he had raised the beginnings of the one weapon needed to face the coming storm. The ultimate shield, his own people. Charong eventually inspected his base top to bottom. She carefully analyzed his warded walls and the massive crowd within. She silently processed the entire operation, keeping her thoughts completely hidden. She gave him a cold, precise report, warning him of their dangerous exposure. She warned that a crowded base meant having too many people in it, and that a massive crowd meant many mouths he could not always trust. He took the warning seriously, calculating the danger but choosing to let it stand. He let it sit, knowing the only alternative was hiding completely on his own. A solitary base helps absolutely no one. Soon, her calculated risk came due. It started with one terrified riser, whose panic completely overtook his common sense. The man had arrived looking for safety, just like all the others. The reckoner had targeted him, and our guy had sheltered him gladly. He fed him from his endless treasury, giving him a safe home. But over time, his fear of the hunters grew far too intense. He stopped trusting the base walls. The master did not see this coming. He couldn't watch everyone, and Chirian couldn't read every heart in the base. So he learned the brutal truth after the fact, cold and utterly blindsided. The traitor slipped away, running straight through the broken terrain. He fled straight toward the nearest auditor station, carrying their deadly secret. It was a secret, the only thing a sheltered riser had that the auditors actually wanted. The location of Tally Hold, a refuge packed to the brim with hunted, flagged souls. The cull had been chasing them across the broken country. They could never find it. Sold for a promise, the only coin those brutal auditors ever offered a desperate man. An exemption, sparing his own pool from the tithe by selling out everyone else. The very walls that sheltered him, traded away for a single word. He believed the lie, because a terrified man will believe anything that saves him. Suddenly, the tide turned. He felt the enemy's cold gaze zeroing in on the hold. Long before the messengers arrived, Chiryang felt the incoming threat and warned him. She gave it to him straight, no comfort, just raw, terrifying facts. She had been tracking the broken country outside, reading the landscape like a map. She noticed the thin defensive watch, stationed far past the walls, was changing. Standing in the rugged heart of Tally Hold, she delivered the brief, chilling report. The thinness was gone. The enemy watch outside was rapidly building up. In a single hour, passive lookouts transformed into a heavy, moving threat. A massive force, marching with deadly purpose and lockstep coordination. They were closing inward toward the hold. The auditors finally had their exact coordinates. A target they lacked just hours ago was now laid bare before them. This was the richest harvest of flagged survivors they had ever been offered. The hunting party tracking their energy was now aimed straight at the gates. They were marching directly toward the walls that protected everyone he gathered. She did not say the word betrayal. She did not have to because he knew. The auditor holding his file was about to find every single hidden survivor. And the sweep heading their way was designed to completely nullify all mana. But he was a god whose power relied entirely on magic, a terrible matchup. He was facing the ultimate counter, with a hold full of refugees behind him. A trader's bargain was struck far beyond his reach. The sweep was coming. True to warnings, the auditor's sweep arrived with zero announcements or formal rosters. The massive, heavy force Churyong detected was closing the remaining gap. He had only 1 hour to prepare before the sweeping tide crashed against his gates. He spent that brief window the only way his quiet trials had taught him. The vaults had carved a single lesson into his mind: magic was useless. Against an enemy who nullifies mana pools, a god of magic has empty hands. So he did not draw on his magic at all. He reached for the horde instead. Every line of the system's anti-audit blueprints offered the exact same advice. Against a magic nullifying audit, you fight with physical means or you die. Luckily for everyone, Tallyhold was built from the horde, his greatest non-mana asset. From the very first stone, the fortress itself was a physical weapon. He had built a shelter, never realizing he was preparing a massive fortress. Now he would fight the sweep with these walls, reinforcing the stone first. A simple wall is the most boring, mundane defense in the world. And the elite auditors had optimized their entire combat training against the opposite. Safe behind the gates, he converted materials far back from their vanguard. He poured raw horde into the stone, forcing the jagged walls higher. He threw up brand new blockades across the approaches, sealing the path. The hold was registered as nothing. The nulling field found only stone. Stone carried no magic. A sweep designed to drain mana arrived at the stronghold. But instead of a pool of power to consume, it ran into a massive wall. A wall is something climbed with bare hands, not cleared with a magical scan. These auditors spent so long believing power meant a pool that they forgot ancient defenses. The oldest defense in this world was simply stone. He raised it high. He built the stack not with trackable magic, but with sheer numbers and advantage. He used standing assets from his anti-audit reserves as the enemy sweep arrived. Its leading edge hit the first layer of stone, forced to stop and climb. They climbed like men. Next, he flooded the pathways to hold them in place. A wall alone cannot break a sweep. He used the conjuring surplus he learned. This was the single magic function the auditing field could never track or punish. The discarded construct was not a pool to drain, it was trash, so he conjured them. He summoned them by the thousands, just as he once did in the dark. Crude, expendable beasts flooded every pathway left open by his new stone walls. They were made and discarded, falling by the hundreds across the shattered ground. It was a wave of nameless force, with no concentrated magic to target. The audit sweep pushed into the stronghold, only to face an impossible budget. This defense made no sense for his rank, with thousands of throwaway constructs. None of these things were worth draining, yet they completely blocked the way. Auditors who came to drain a single man found themselves bogged down instead. They fought a tide of monsters that cost him nothing, but cost them everything. To clear them took every step. Behind the walls, he hid the risers. Every flagged pool of the stronghold was kept safe from the draining field. He protected them like a release valve, shielding what the harvest wanted. They remained hidden behind stone and garbage that the system could not read. Churyong tracked the incoming sweep, and her unique vision made all the difference. Her tracking had saved them before. Now she stood in the center. Standing in the warded heart of the stronghold, she read the moving weight. She called out the sweep's shape to him before it cleared the walls. As the enemy pressed, she saw where they would try the wall next. A flanking arm peeled off, heading straight for the thinnest point in defenses. But he reinforced that weak spot immediately, guided by her incredible foresight. He could not see the enemy on that terrain, but she saw it for both of them. Guided by her eyes and defended by his constructs, the stronghold held its ground. The sweep had arrived confident they would drain this place dry within an hour. But in the heat of battle, she sensed a betrayal that changes everything. She brought the grim news to him directly, dropping her usual calm composure. The greedy trader who sold them this stronghold was marching alongside the sweep. He was actively pointing out the defenses he sold, relying on their promise. The trader believed his own mana pool was exempt from the coming devastation. He traded everyone else to buy his safety, but that exemption was fake. She saw the truth in their spells. The auditors had marked him too. His power would be drained with everyone else. The promise was just a trick. They paid a cowardly trader with false hope just to find the location. No escape, she warned him that a pool too large was dangerous. The system rejects whatever bargain they think they made, this trader. The man traded protective walls for an empty promise the auditors never meant to keep. Even the sweep he led to the gate was meant to erase him too. The harvest never spares its crop for snitching, it only devours them much faster. It only claims them much sooner. He made the cold, calculated call, exactly as the carrier had taught him. Plain reporting only, the heroic story is a complete lie. Saving the trader was completely out of reach, so he did not try. A stronghold relying on stone walls against a mana-killing sweep has zero reach. No clean way to pull him in, no defensive layout to hide him. The trader stood outside, caught in the field that would soon erase him. To go out meant exposing the risers behind him to the deadly tithe. So he held the wall, braced the flood, and kept his people safe. Behind the heavy stone, the field could not touch them, let the law take its course on the trader. He had sold out the walls for a completely empty word. Soon the very sweep he brought to the gate ended up erasing him. He refused to spend a single defensive stone trying to stop it. Those stones were the lives of his people. The traitor already spent his own. The stronghold held, but the traitor did not. The harvest claimed him immediately. It devoured the sellout exactly as it would have swallowed the rest. His foolish bargain only bought him a quicker death than the others. Yet the sweep failed entirely because his people were safe behind the walls. Suddenly, a new system function unlocked, rising just when he needed it. And this system feature came as the perfect answer to a deadly sweep targeting his stronghold. His flashing system panel named it the Ward Network, laying its details out plainly. Every defensive ward he had painstakingly built was about to connect. The standing stones and barriers across Tallyhold began to hum. His non-mana defenses were pulled together, weaving into a single massive barrier. This ward network bound the whole territory, showing only dead stone to audits. No watching eye could spot it, no single tithe could nullify it. The stronghold was finally whole, scattered defenses locked into a unified shield. A perfect defense that would stand tall without him, directing every stone. He felt the defensive grid weave through Tallyhold as the sweep crashed in. This was the first ground that was entirely his and completely unreadable. An unauditable fortress stood where fragile insurance had failed just moments before. His people were safe inside. Out front, the dangerous floodwaters still churned violently. But the wall was a single, warded weave holding against them. The sweeping force came expecting an easy victory, but hit a massive wall. It hit a massive dead zone they could neither read, nullify, nor climb over. Suddenly, the sweep retreated. He felt them pull back before Charing noticed. The crushing pressure on the walls finally eased up after an hour. Constructs out in the flood suddenly found themselves with absolutely no target. Where a massive sweeping force had just been pressing, only empty space now remained. He priced it as grade 1, but the price was wrong, and then the auditor swept in. The enemy force didn't retreat because the walls held, it only pulled back to make room. Churyong froze in her tracks. She went completely still the moment she read. What the others couldn't, she saw the shattered land past the emptying. Approaches unable to give him a simple report, what she read didn't fit any expression she had. The sweeping force had cleared the ground. Instead of failing, a clean sweep always prepares the field for the one man who doesn't even need it, out past the scarred walls, across the ruined land. The constructs had dissolved into mud. A single figure was walking toward his gate. He analyzed the traveler the way he had read the quiet march, blind to his mana pool. Seeing only the shape, and that shape told him what the appraiser's stillness had already revealed. The man came alone because an army was only meant to hunt a mana pool, and he wasn't here to hunt. Nullifying one was his only goal. The chief of the cap auditors didn't bring an army to drain a single target's mana. His entire trade was built on the fact that any mana was nothing his nulling power couldn't reach. A backup force would just be more targets to protect while he worked, so he had sent his forces to clear the path, and now he was walking up it alone, the survivor of a prior conflict, the man who didn't just fight a target, but ended them completely. He was the one who tracked a climber for weeks, never finding them until the system gave him the file. This was the man who had claimed his name off the warden's index to hunt down. Since the first morning he had been awake, he had felt this threat. Now the enemy was crossing the last of the churned ground to his gate. Alone and unhurried, he walked with the confidence of someone certain of victory. The walls he had raised against the sweep still stood between this killer and a fortress full of survivors, and those walls were only stone, and stone cannot stop a man who is here to drain. Bake Gango stopped at the gate of Tallyhold and looked up at the walls. And at him standing above, he stood over the fortress he had held against an army. With the one weapon they couldn't touch, looking down at the single man who had never needed an army, Bake Gango stared up at him from the muddy ground at the foot of the gate, making no move to speak. His complete silence was deeply unsettling, as every other enemy before him had always wanted him to know exactly what was coming their way. Instead, this man simply stood in the thick mud left by the dissolved constructs. A plain gray man with empty hands, letting the heavy silence settle over the walls like a cold shroud. Behind him, lined up along the inner pathways where he had kept them safe, the risers of Tallyhold watched him with the terror of prey cornered at last. Every single one of them froze on the stone, and he felt their dread pressing against his back. He had held these walls against an entire force for hours, using stone, waste, and an appraiser's eyes. That army was something he could actually fight with barriers, floods, and sheer physical power. But looking down at this single man walking up the cleared road, he understood with absolute clarity that the brutal battle he had just won had actually been the easy one. The traveler spoke first, sounding like a machine. The auditor stood unhurried, quietly reading from a ledger he had reviewed 1,000 times before. Without even raising his voice, the auditor calmly told him that he was indeed the official auditor of record on the file, marked completely uncountable, and that it had stood open on a warden's index ever since the reckoner faulted. To close it, the stranger offered him no name, not the registry one, and not the 11th S. A name meant nothing to a man who nullified pools for a living. And the stamp meant nothing to him. The power pool was all that mattered. He calmly warned him that the decree permitted growth only up to his stamp, and absolutely no further. But our hero had grown far past every single stamp it kept. And the penalty was the tithe. There was absolutely no threat anywhere in his voice. You do not threaten a sum you are about to subtract, he gauged him. The only way he knew how. As an adversary, his entire power meant absolutely nothing to. And he forced himself to stand firm, though his entire body wanted to flinch. The pool hovering directly above his head was massive, running off the edge of any measuring instrument, a total the reckoner faulted on. It was the largest violation of the ceiling ever logged. He had spent the entire last hour learning all over again how worthless his power was, because the wedge opened the vault and his pool did not. Now his ultimate lesson was walking straight to his gate in person. Every enemy he had ever put down, the husks, the sieve, the drowned wardens, and the reliquary warden he had buried under 1,000 constructs, all of them had answered to his numbers in the end, having bodies he could break or drown. But Ganto answered to absolutely nothing his pool could do, and he stood completely untouched. Because the pool was exactly what he came to take, a god holding a weapon. His enemy eats for breakfast is holding absolutely nothing at all. The auditor laid his correction upon him without making a gesture, the one thing he could not prepare for, no matter how he spun it, that the absolute worst thing the decree could do arrived with absolutely no violence. He had braced for a blow, some reaching weight he could throw stone barriers in front of. What came instead was a subtraction. It started at the top of the pool, where the figures ran past every imaginable rank with no ceiling left to name, slowly drawing that total downward. He felt his squaring engine, running uncapped since day one, meet a hand that did not try to match it, outgrow it, or break it. It simply took it, draining his pool, just as the quiet march had swallowed the reach he poured into the auditor lock, or like a field of tithe marks, reducing every single riser's pool down to a clean zero, the unfathomable number that no instrument could write. Began falling for the first time since the first dawn of his power. It plummeted. Fast, and he will recount it plainly, because dressing it up was a luxury. He could not afford even now, that uncountable figure followed by an endless tail of digits that the panel itself had always refused to print, dropped. Place by place, reversing faster than the reckoner had ever climbed. Its tail of digits shortened, the rank line beside it redrawing itself past S rank. With no threshold above, crashing down through the exact limits he had once cleared in a single night, he had crossed S rank on the fourth morning, never looking back. But now the ladder caught up to him from above, and his legendary figure began falling past the apex, past rank 10, past 1,000,000, and kept dropping. 100,000, the digits the faulted machine displayed peeled away, one after another. Meanwhile, the silent man at his gate stood in the mud, completely unreadable. Read, down through the thousands his pool plummeted, leaving him on the deep E. Second night, the 16 of the first, that engine he deemed totally unstoppable. Unspooling under a calculation he had no answer for, the risers behind him made the sound a held breath makes when it finally releases as they watched. The 11th, the uncountable, the man whose walls had held off a sweep. Drained on his own gate by a spare gray figure who had not even lifted an arm, he heard the stillness break into the low murmur of people finally understanding that the very thing they fled to was being unmade right before them. Under that noise, he read his own panel, because an actuary reads the figures to the end. Even when that figure means his absolute ruin, the pool fell past 4, the public floor, the most boring number in the allotment, the stamp he hid behind. For 5 days it did not stop at 4, down through the last of itself the numbers went like water finding the bottom of a drain, and the private line that had read a figure too long to print since the 4th morning now printed for the first time in the history of his own panel, a clean and final 0, 0. He stood on the wall of the hold he had built against the harvest, reading the one number he had never once seen beside his own name. The squaring engine that had carried him off the bottom of the world fell completely silent, the pool nulled, the figure gone, a god subtracted down to the absolute floor, and then thrown to nothing at all. For the length of that reading, he was what the first morning had stamped him, and worse, a 0 under the floor of the 4, the dead weight became literal. He stood on a high stone wall with no mana left in him at all. Hold full of the hunted behind him, expecting him to be strong. Imagine that pressure, out past the gate. The constructs of the flood had already begun to fail without a pool to sustain them. The 1,000 throwaway things he had poured into the approaches went still, crumbling in the mud because conjure surpasses and mana function failed, and the mana was gone. The walls still stood because those walls were stone, and stone needs no pool to hold enemies out, but the walls were anti-audit, the horde, the one defense the tithe could not drink, and the man at his gate had not come to fight the walls, he had come to fight him, and he had won the fight. He could not win the battle over the pool before either of them had even moved a stride. Reading that 0 was a thing his enemy allowed him to do. That was the cruelty in him. If a man who only subtracts can be said to have cruelty, it was that he stood in the churned mud and gave him the time to watch his own figure reach the bottom and stay there, because the tithe is not some instant deed that can be argued with afterward. It is a correction held in place. He felt the nulling settle and hold, a heavy hand keeping his drained pool locked. There would be no squaring at the next dawn, and no thread of the engine left to reach for. As the auditor lock held his grasp, he poured himself into it and never let go. Chirian in the warded heart of the hold behind him had gone still, in that specific manner that came over her when a reading ran past. He did not even have to turn to know what she was reading. The 11th S, now showing a 0 where the uncountable figure once stood. A valve completely drained on its own gate by a man whose faction existed to keep the lid felt heavy. The risers saw it as the end, and so did he. For one cold breath, the part of him that had been weak his whole life stood on a wall, with nothing in his hands, right in front of the only man who had never needed an army. Then the part of him that cracked an auditor vault with a wedge while the pool sat useless in his chest told the rest of him to stop reading the number that was gone and start reading the man who took it. Ganto stood in the mud below the gate, with his entire pool drained into his own under account, absolutely sure with the flat certainty of a man finishing a sum, and his certainty was built on a single thing, the exact same thing the lock and the quiet march were built on. He came to take that pool because that pool was the entirety of what a man like him was. A god is his mana, and nothing else, and a god with his mana annulled to zero is just a corpse. Who has not been told yet, every riser he ever tithed was exactly that, a pool. With absolutely nothing behind it, ended in one pass, Ganto had walked up his road. Alone because he had no reason in the world to imagine that the man on the wall was anything but the largest mana pool he was sent to drain, and a drain pool does not fight back. He read that certainty just like he read the captain's, who counted him as 4, drained on his own wall with the hunted at his back. He understood that the chief of the cap auditors had just made the exact same mistake. Every party captain in the Civ had made, the only mistake that had ever mattered. He had counted the pool and called it the man. He had spent the horde on this exact morning without knowing it was this morning, just as he spent 11 years pricing catastrophes for other people before the realm finally priced one for him. While he wore the 4, carried other men's bags, and let the realm agree. He was poor. The broker had been moving cores and relics through 12 fronts and turning them into clean gold. That gold he had been turning quietly into the one kind of thing the anti-audit system called non-mana actually means, pure force. That carried no pool for a nulling field to target, a god whose every weapon was mana had bought while pretending to own nothing, an armory of weapons that were not mana at all. The walls of Tallyhold were the largest of them, but not the only ones, so when Ganto started up the road toward the gate, certain his drain pool was a finished sum, he came down off the wall to meet him, and he came down with his hands full of the things the horde had bought against. Precisely a man who nulls mana. The first was simple, a thrown weapon. Sealed alchemical flask, the broker had sourced from a realmsmith who worked in chemical reagents instead of cores, the kind of charge holding its violence in chemistry and not in a pool. He threw it ahead of him as he dropped from the inner course, and it shattered against the stone at Ganto's feet, going up in a hard chemical bloom, heat and force with no mana anywhere in it, nothing for his field to reach into and nullify. Ganto had not braced for it because someone whose enemies are all mana pools does not brace for chemistry, and the blast caught him, crossed the side and spun him, and for the first time since walking up his road, that spare gray certainty vanished from his face. Recovery came to him just as it comes to a survivor of a prior allotment, fast and without panic. His hand shot up to nullify the thing that struck him, but his nulling closed on absolutely nothing. There was absolutely nothing in that chemical bloom for his magic to seize. He watched the auditor reach for a mana pool in the strike, finding nothing. And then came the exact moment that the sheer wrongness of it hit him. A man who believed all force was mana had finally met a force that wasn't. That hesitation cost him a single step, a mistake he knew how to exploit. He moved in now, not with magic, but with the brutal leverage he mastered. In his other hand, he gripped a heavy bar of plain, hardened iron. It was just scrap metal, but it offered the mechanical force he needed. The exact same dull physical leverage that had cracked the auditor lock open. While his opponent vainly grasped for magic, he closed the distance instantly. Drained or not, he rammed the heavy iron bar forward with his entire body weight. His shoulders locked with terrifying, bone-crushing strength as he struck. Before Ganto could even react, the bar connected with a sickening thud. It struck with the hard reality of solid iron, with zero magic to negate. A brutal vibration traveled straight up the metal weapon and deep into his arms. This was a real, devastating impact delivered by a true, heavy physical tool. The chief of the cap auditors absorbed the massive blow directly on his guard. Staggering backward a half-beat late, he stumbled a full step through the wet mud. It was not a lethal blow, and he had never intended it to be one. Nobody defeats a legendary veteran of a prior allotment with just one simple swing. But it was a wound, and the auditor recovered with blood leaking from his temple. The bar had bypassed his guard entirely and scraped right against the bone. For the first time, his gray face was marked with something unseen in ages. An elite auditor had actually been hurt. The master of negating magic was bleeding. He was touched not by spellcraft, which he normally absorbed, but by physical steel. A broken flask, a scrap iron bar, and an enemy who anticipated his every move. Behind him, someone standing on the inner wall let out a sudden, sharp gasp. It was the stunned cry of a spectator who had just witnessed the impossible. They had watched their ally get completely drained of power just moments before this. Now they watched the seemingly invincible figure who drained them begin to bleed. Imagine the absolute shock as everyone realized this fight was far from over. The man standing on the wall with absolutely no mana had just marked their nightmare. He had successfully drawn blood from the one foe whom magic could never hope to touch. Someone called it out in a cracked voice, needing to hear it to believe it. The terrifying chief of the Cap Auditors was actively bleeding in the mud. And it happened without a single drop of magical energy being spent against him. He did not look back or let their cheers distract his focus from the fight. Stopping to celebrate in front of a wounded beast like Ganto is pure suicide. But he let the victory stand on the record of this brutal, unforgiving trial. They had retreated to a place that was supposed to be their final grave. Yet the man holding the line had just drawn blood from their ultimate harvester. Ganto touched the red line on his temple and stared blankly at his blood. That smug, absolute certainty did not return to his cold, gray face this time. Because a bleeding wound is not something any warrior can easily ignore or deny. His eyes drifted slowly to the heavy iron bar and the shattered flask below. They had built this on a body that completely nulled the pool behind them, and now Ganto sized him up all over again, just like Churyong had done back in the market. Looking him up and down, reading past the drained shell to find the real beast inside. The monster inside him, Ganto walked up his road, utterly certain of his victory. Thinking he was just closing a routine file, but bleeding in the mud, he understood. He had marched right up to a man who spent a massive secret fortune, preparing for the exact day his pool was taken, every single weapon in. His hands had been built specifically to crush the exact enemy standing before him. He pressed the attack because his grueling journey had taught him one absolute truth above all. An enemy who is busy recalculating is an enemy who is not yet fighting back. Single split second of hesitation is all it takes to make a kill, so he went. At him with the bar, the flasks, and the raw leverage the horde had bought. There was absolutely no magic here, just a mortal man fighting a god killer with chemistry, pure iron, and the relentless force of a heavy wedge splitting open a seam. Ganto met him now like a hardened survivor of a prior battle who finally understood. He stopped trying to drain a magic pool that did not exist and fought. With his bare hands, just as men fought before the world taught them. To rely on mana pools, this was the first genuine life-or-death struggle he had faced since his very first morning, because every previous victory had been achieved with a massive, overpowered system advantage. This one he had to win using his bare hands and the gear he had paid for, facing an opponent whose hands survived a prior battle before this. Ganto was highly skilled, aged, and lean, moving with the deadly precision of a survivor who had outlived everyone else around him. That was Ganto, and he had built his whole life on the belief that a mana pool was the only threat. But our hero had built his strategy over these past hours on a completely different truth. That completely shattered that belief against a man who can nullify all magical power. The only weapon that reaches him is one that never used mana.